Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Cabbage Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Gained Godlike Healing? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. His mother told him it was not his fault and that they could not have stopped it. She spoke with a calm he could not understand, but he thought she should be sad, angry, shocked, anything but composed. On television, a reporter announced that Izuku Yagi, a 13-year-old quirkless boy, had been confirmed dead after an apparent jump from a cliff. The body had been found without obvious injuries, and there was speculation that someone had attempted to heal him after his death. Izumo stared blankly at the TV as tears streamed down his face. His baby brother, his twin soul, the boy he had spent every second of his life with, was gone. He believed that it was his fault. He replayed in his head that he had pushed his brother, that he had failed to protect him, that he had called him delusional for dreaming of becoming a hero. At the grave, Izumo whispered that he had only wanted to protect him and wondered why his brother had never spoken up when he was hurt. He traced his hand over the stone and begged for forgiveness, insisting that his brother had deserved to become a hero. He thought he did not deserve it, and neither did their parents or friends. Their classmates showed no sympathy. Some had shouted that with the quirkless boy gone, Izumo could pursue a hero career without being burdened by his relative. Those words had contributed to an incident that resulted in Izumo receiving a month of detention. Only Kaken had shown visible devastation. Kaken had cried and shouted that the nerd could not be dead, even punching a picture on the wall of the three of them. Kaken insisted that he was not weak enough to die and should be alive. In reality, the boy was safe and alone in a distant cave, far from everyone. Animals rested peacefully around him. His green hair and eyes had changed to white, and his body looked different. After the fall, he had lain in pain for a few minutes before a warm golden energy enveloped him. He had felt his consciousness separate from his body briefly and then return as if his soul had been encased in new flesh. He walked to the cave and found his body feeling lighter than before. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply as energy gathered around him, responding to his will and swirling like rings. He practiced with that power for hours until exhaustion finally took him, but instead of drifting away, he noticed animals approaching him. Birds, rabbits, squirrels, and even a bear came close, and the animals seemed drawn to him as if he were a magnet. When he saw a rabbit limping, he reached out to check it, and the rabbit's leg returned to normal. His hand glowed with golden energy. He realized this was his quirk, a power that had awakened under extreme stress. He felt like a source of warmth and light, strong and new. He fashioned a blade of energy and understood there was much to learn. He trained and studied for months. When he felt ready, he tested his abilities in public during the entrance exam for UA, his dream. During the exam hearing, the principal asked All Might if he had any connection to someone named Izuku. All Might and his wife looked embarrassed, but their son explained that his twin brother had been named Izuku and was no longer with them. The principal acknowledged this and said the boy would still be allowed to take the entrance exam, though if his quirk resembled his brother's it could present complications. The boy noted that his brother had been quirkless, and the thought tightened his chest. He blamed that absence of a quirk for everything that had happened to his brother. Confrontation with his parents had been bitter. Izumo had told them he hoped their son would never forgive them for neglecting him. Their father had replied that they had simply focused on Izumo's growth, and his mother had coldly described the boy as weak, both physically and mentally. Izumo privately insisted that his brother had not been weak. Izuku disliked standing next to his brother and Kaken during the announcement of the exam rules. He could have stood elsewhere, but he had been placed beside them while Present Mike explained the tests. Izumo watched him throughout the explanation, making him uncomfortable, while Kaken stood apart, scoffing at every minor inconvenience. Present Mike announced that the students would be facing 4 different types of robots, each assigned a corresponding number of points. The hero explained that the students' goal was to get as many points as possible. Suddenly, a blue-haired teen stood and ranted that the papers listed 4 robots instead of 3 and that such mistakes were unacceptable for the staff of the most prestigious school. The hero answered enthusiastically that there were 4 robots but only 3 awarded villain points. The fourth was merely a distraction. Izuku was guided into the fake city with the rest of the students and recognized his brother and the blue-haired teen among them. They were talking about something he could not catch, so he ignored them and waited for the gates to open so the exam could begin. When the gates opened, everyone looked around expecting a countdown that never came, and Izuku and Izumo rushed in. Izuku immediately located a group of robots, levitated them, and slammed them together until they were disabled. Izumo used golden energy blasts to overwhelm the robots in front of him. The two moved in opposite directions, each using his own methods to break through the robots and rack up points. The hero urged the students to act, reminding them that there was no countdown in a real battle. The students surged forward, finding green metal debris scattered across the simulated city. On the monitors, Nizu informed All Might that Izumo was performing excellently, already rising through the ranks and matching Katsuki Bakugo. Their scores were nearly identical. Aizawa countered that while they were powerful, they were causing too much destruction and putting other contestants at risk, and that some students were showing better control. The screen showed Izuku shielding a contestant from a large piece of rubble caused when Izumo smashed a robot into a wall. Izuku then formed a blade of energy and used it to disable several robots efficiently. Inko watched intently and wondered what his quirk could be, how he could move so fast and hit so hard while also producing energy constructs. Nizu reviewed the registration and hesitantly read the name and quirk listed for Izuku Yagi, noting that more information would be needed to understand the source and limits of his power. He speculated that Izuku might have an enhanced body capable of manipulating energy in various ways but emphasized the need for further testing. Aizawa expressed that he wanted to see the limits of the student's abilities, a statement that surprised some of the other heroes. Nizu, smiling with a hint of mischief, agreed and reached for a red button. He explained that the zero-pointer might not be the strongest foe but would be sufficient to test both strength and heroism, then pressed the button to release a massive robot. The machine's presence created a tremor as it moved through the simulated city. Many students focused on points and scattered, but a brown-haired girl trapped in the rubble called for help. Both brothers stopped and turned back. Izumo leapt, landed hard, and struck the robot, which detonated in a burst of force. Pain forced him to clutch his leg, and he began to fall, unable to use his telekinetic control. As Izumo braced for impact and wondered if this was how Izuku had felt in similar moments, Izuku jumped and caught him before he hit the ground. Izuku scolded him for being reckless as he laid him down gently. The announcer, Mike, declared the practical exam over and informed the students that injured participants would be healed and others could proceed to the written exam. Izumo winced as the school's nurse, recovery girl, hurried over and exclaimed that he had hurt himself. She moved to place her healing touch on his forehead, but Izuku stepped in and shielded them both, preventing the immediate healing. Izuku explained that his quirk affected stamina and that a full, immediate heal might leave Izumo unable to finish the written exam. Recovery girl acknowledged the concern but noted that he also could not continue in the state he was in. Izuku smiled and held onto his brother as his eyes and hair briefly flared gold before returning to their usual white. He kept that hold only a moment. Izumo sat up, checked his arms and legs, and was stunned to find he had no lasting injuries. He was fine. Izuku did not speak and walked away toward the exam hall. Izumo called after him, but Izuku did not respond and hurried on. When everyone assembled for the written exam, Izumo took a seat next to Izuku. Izumo began to ask a question, but Izuku cut him off with a curt command to be quiet. Later, a hologram of All Might recorded on a small disc announced that, after an extraordinary display of power and heroism, Izuku Yagi had been accepted into UA as a first-year Hero Corps student. The disc had been placed inside an acceptance letter and sent through the mail center that Izuku had used to contact the school. With his acceptance confirmed, Izuku had one pressing concern left besides figuring out his parents: a hero costume that matched his abilities. He wanted something flashy that suited his powers and favored a Greek-inspired design. The costume could wait, however. He still had to reach the school and find his classroom. Standing before a towering door, he muttered that it could fit a giant and pushed it open. Inside, he found Izumo and Bakugo sitting together while Bakugo argued with the blue-haired teen from the entrance exam. Izuku stepped into the room, planning to head to his seat. He saw Izumo stand and rush toward him, but he ignored him. Izumo begged him to talk while holding his hand. Izuku snatched his hand away, rolled his eyes, and moved to an empty seat, saying he did not feel like talking. Several students watched the interaction with confusion. Aizawa ordered them to stop talking. A huge yellow caterpillar then stood up and introduced itself as Shota Aizawa before opening to reveal a tired-looking man who stepped out as their homeroom teacher. Aizawa instructed everyone to change into their sports uniforms and head to the training ground for a Quirk apprehension test. Uraraka protested that they would miss orientation, but Aizawa dismissed the events as unnecessary and insisted that Hero Corps students should spend their time training. He stepped outside without taking further questions. Everyone followed his orders and rushed to the changing rooms. In the changing area, Denki Kaminari pointed out a large pale circular scar on Izuku's shoulder that extended toward his chest and neck. The mark looked like the aftermath of an old, powerful injury rather than something fresh. Kirishima asked where it had come from, and Izuku answered that it had been caused by cruel people. He finished dressing, smiled at them, and left, noticing Izumo watching with tired, dull eyes. At the training ground, Aizawa announced that Izuku had scored the highest on the written exam by a wide margin and told him to demonstrate how far he could throw a ball using his powers. Izuku prepared in the marked circle. His eyes and hair glowed golden as energy gathered around the ball. He launched it skyward with a bright burst that produced a shockwave. The measuring device displayed the distance, 826 meters. Kaminari reacted loudly to the number. Mina Ashido thought it looked amazing, and Uraraka said it looked fun. Aizawa, irritated by their excitement, raised the stakes by declaring that the student who placed last would be expelled and could no longer pursue hero training at the school. Toru Hagakure protested, but Aizawa maintained that fairness was not a guarantee in hero training. Izuku observed that fairness was not a choice and walked away. The physical tests began. Izuku placed second in the 50-meter dash behind Tenya Ida. He scored highest in the grip strength test with a reading of 590 kilograms. For the standing long jump, he focused energy in his legs and cleared the distance easily. The repeated sidestep drill required him to balance on an energy plank he moved beneath his feet, and he earned first place. In the ball throw event, Uraraka used her quirk to cancel the ball's gravity, allowing it to float for an unusually long distance and placing her first. Izuku finished second. During the tests, Aizawa interrupted Izumo and disabled his quirk to make a point. Aizawa warned that relying on a powerful ability that could harm the user without proper control would prevent someone from succeeding as a hero. Izumo nodded and returned to his attempt, but Izuku stepped in and advised him to focus the power differently instead of abandoning it. Izumo, surprised that Izuku had spoken to him, followed the advice and channeled his power into a single finger, sending the ball flying and producing a strong shockwave. The device registered a distance of 705.5 meters, and Izumo managed the result despite injuring his finger in the process. Izuku approached, touched the finger, and healed it completely. Izuku made clear that he had helped only so Izumo could show his abilities, not because he wanted to start a friendship. Izumo sighed but resolved to find a way to reconnect with his brother. The remaining events continued. Izuku placed third in the long-distance run behind Ida and Bakugo. He noted to Aizawa that he needed to work on his speed. Aizawa acknowledged the remark and made a mental note. Izuku also took first in repeated toe touches and sit-ups. When the results were posted, Toru Hagakure stood at the bottom of the list and trembled. Aizawa admitted he had lied about expelling the last-ranked student and told everyone they could return to class. As the students argued and dispersed, Izuku sensed a familiar presence behind a nearby wall where Aizawa had gone. He slipped closer and recognized All Might in conversation with Aizawa. Aizawa asked All Might why he was there, and All Might replied that he had been checking on the students he might soon be teaching. Aizawa mentioned Izuku's top score, and All Might warned him not to interfere with matters that were personal. They continued their conversation privately before returning to the others. The hero promised that once Niza found a way, He would ensure Nizu was no longer listed under Aizawa's last name and that they would find him a proper home where he would be cared for. All Might scoffed as he approached Aizawa and demanded to know why that would not happen, beginning an insult that was cut off when Izuku released a burst of energy that cracked the pavement beside All Might's foot. Izuku told him to stop being rude as he walked forward. All Might smirked at his son and noted that he had finally come to see his father and that he had a lot to explain. Izuku answered that he had come to confront the number one hero who had given his quirk to his son who already had a quirk instead of the boy he had neglected and pushed aside for being quirkless. Aizawa stared in confusion. All Might's eyes widened. Izuku explained that he had heard All Might reveal his identity to Izumo and that All Might had received a quirk from his master, meaning he had been quirkless before. Izuku accused him of neglecting him for something that had happened because of All Might, then declared that he had activated his quirk and vowed to exceed All Might and become a symbol of safety and power for the country and the world. Aizawa and Toshinori could only stare in shock. Izumo, who had followed him, had also overheard. Bakugo stood frozen, processing what he had seen and muttering to himself, astonished that Izuku Yagi Deku was alive and had a quirk. A lingering charge of energy hung in the air after Izuku's display. Izumo sat alone, not speaking, staring at a faded photograph of himself and his brother when they were 4. It was the last picture they had together. After that day his parents had pushed his brother away. He had no more photos with him because his parents never took his brother anywhere. He had no twin pictures at school because others would taunt him about being associated with the quirkless boy. His mother called up that it was time to head for school and reminded him about the first study session with his father, who had said he had a big plan. Izumo sighed and placed the photo on his nightstand beside a small necklace they had gotten as children and 9 birthday letters his brother had written to him every year since they were 4. He had not received one on his 13th birthday. His brother was no longer there to write it. Izuku arrived early to class and sat down, glancing at Bakugo's seat for a moment before scoffing. Students began filing in. Siro asked if anyone knew who their hero basic training teacher would be, suggesting it might be All Might. Izuku shrugged and mumbled that he hoped it was not, a remark noticed only by a particular scarred boy. A paper fluttered toward Izuku. He caught it and looked around to see Izumo smiling at him from his seat. Izuku crumpled the paper and put it in his pocket, and Izumo's expression darkened as he watched, wondering if his twin truly hated him that much. 3 dull lessons passed and the students hurried out for lunch. Izumo stepped up and invited Izuku to sit with them, but Izuku declined and walked on. Izumo watched him go, worrying this would become a pattern. Izuku joined Ochako Uraraka and Tenya Ida for a moment before walking off to sit alone, scrolling through his phone. He researched the fastest heroes in Japan, thinking about speed and his own weaknesses. He mulled over how he already pushed himself with his power but needed something to provide speed around him more consistently. He noticed Shuto Todoroki nearby and smiled a greeting. Todoroki returned the greeting. A silence settled until Todoroki asked if Izuku had anything to do with Bakugo Katsuki, explaining that Bakugo had been glaring at him since he sat there. Izuku suggested ignoring him and met Bakugo's glare in return. Todoroki did not elaborate. Izumo also glared at Todoroki without Izuku noticing. Izuku tried to keep things casual by showing Todoroki what was on his phone, but the two fell into quiet again. When the bell rang, they headed back to class. All Might strode in with theatrical energy, announcing his arrival like a seasoned pro and immediately energizing the room. The students erupted in cheers and disbelief at the sight of their idol teaching them, praising his costume and the fact that he would be their instructor. Izuku observed his classmates with pity, thinking they had no idea who the person behind the idol really was. All Might called the students to attention and declared that he would be teaching the most important class for Hero Core students, Hero Basic Training. The class reacted with renewed excitement. For their first training session, he announced that they would have a trial battle, and Izumo muttered in dismay, suspecting his father's plan was to set him against his brother. The students braced themselves as All Might continued. All Might called out that everyone was looking good as drawers extended from the wall, each labeled with a different number. He explained that the costumes had been provided based on the students' quirk registration forms and personal requests, then ordered everyone to suit up and meet him at training ground Beta. The students cheered and filed out to get their costumes. Izuku lingered behind, still sighing in defeat at having to deal with All Might. He glared at the hero and demanded to know why he was still there. All Might snapped that Izuku was taking too long and that a hero should not waste time. Izuku retorted sharply that a hero should not neglect his family or anyone else and that All Might had no right to lecture him about heroism. As Izuku moved to shut the door, he told All Might not to call him by his last name. Izuku hurried to the changing room. Everyone had already finished except for Izumo, who was just about to leave. Izumo wore a forest green full-body jumpsuit with a red belt, black elbow and knee pads, yellow gloves, and his signature red boots. His mask had long ear-like protrusions reminiscent of All Might's hair and a respirator with a makeshift smile. The costume was the one the two brothers had worked on together as children when they decided to become heroes. Izumo asked Izuku to listen to him. Izuku scoffed and turned away. Izumo said he understood why Izuku was angry and asked him to hear him, mentioning that their father might be planning to put them against each other in the battle training. Izuku replied that their father could do as he pleased and that he intended to win regardless of the opponent. As Izuku pulled off his shirt, the scars on his back were visible, causing Izumo to flinch. Izumo quietly apologized and wished he could undo his past childish mistakes. Izuku muttered that he did not need an apology and that he no longer cared about the Yagi family. The words broke Izumo, who could only nod before walking away with tears in his eyes. A few minutes later, Izuku followed, his costume trailing behind him. Momo admired Izuku when she saw him, and Mina expressed how good he looked. Kirishima complimented Izuku's physique, calling him muscular and manly. Izuku laughed and thanked them. Izumo, voice soft and sad, told his brother that he looked divine and, in his thoughts, wished Izuku had chosen the costume they had shared. Izuku nodded and turned, his back flexing slightly. Izuku wore white robes that draped over one shoulder and wrapped around his waist, leaving parts of his upper body bare. He wore a laurel wreath crown, gold armbands and bracelets, golden bands on his lower legs, traditional sandals with thin straps, and a pendant with a vibrant yellow gemstone set in a decorative frame with alternating gold and silver rays. When Izuku stepped forward, All Might stood before him, taken aback and remarking that the costume was certainly revealing. Izuku shrugged. He noticed that many classmates had chosen outfits that showed skin. Bakugo glared at him, fists twisting as if ready to erupt with anger. All Might then explained the test. Teams of 2 would be formed, with one team acting as villains possessing a simulated nuclear weapon while the other team would be the hero duo tasked with saving the day by either capturing the villains or finding and touching the weapon. Zero asked whether the exam would be indoors. All Might confirmed that it would be held inside, noting that statistics showed many villain attacks and hero interventions occurred within buildings and facilities. Ida asked if teams had been decided by analyzing quirks and matching the best pairings. All Might shook his head. Izuku said that matching by quirk would not be as authentic as a real mission, since in an actual attack heroes nearby would be forced to pair regardless of compatibility. All Might agreed with Izuku and explained that they had chosen to use a random draw to select teams for authenticity. The students exchanged nods. All Might began drawing names at random. To both Izuku and Izumo's surprise, they were placed on the same side as teammates, assigned to Team E. Izumo admitted that he had not expected that, and Izuku remained silent, still glaring at the situation. All Might announced that Team E would face Team D. He informed Team D that they would act as the villains and must keep the simulated bomb hidden at all costs. He instructed Team E, as the heroes, to find the bomb or capture the villains within the allotted time. A hero announced that the villains had 5 minutes to hide the weapon before the heroes stepped in. Team D, consisting of Bakugo and Ida, nodded and rushed inside, the blonde glancing sharply at the twins. Izumo warned that Kaken would target him. Izuku nodded and stepped aside, instructing the others to handle Ida and the bomb while he dealt with Bakugo. Izumo offered to help with Bakugo, but Izuku entered the building as the 5-minute mark hit. A few minutes in, Izuku felt an explosion bearing down and immediately summoned a protective shield. Bakugo reacted with furious questions and unleashed repeated explosive attacks while demanding to know how Izuku was alive, accusing him of lying and faking his death. Izuku blocked each blast with his shield, glared at Bakugo, and used the shield to shove him backward. He ordered Izumo to rush to the bomb and then moved to confront Bakugo directly. Izumo scoffed and ran for the stairs. Bakugo charged and threw a punch, and Izuku dodged, using the momentum to leap onto Bakugo and twist his arm to stop the strike. Izuku then propelled Bakugo backward with the shield. Bakugo vowed to force answers and came at him again. Izuku dodged one explosion after another and kept blocking until he found himself cornered. Bakugo raised his gauntlets and explained that they stored his sweat, which fueled his explosions, preparing to unleash a powerful blast. Students watching in the support room reacted with alarm. Uraraka and the others could see the threat on the monitors and feared for Izuku's safety. Bakugo fired, but Izuku smashed through the wall and leaped out, leaving the floor damaged and the rest of the building shaken as several windows shattered. Izuku looked up toward the top floor where Izumo was and summoned a levitating energy platform beneath him. The platform rose until he reached the floor from which he had jumped. Bakugo shouted and prepared another explosion before Izuku could re-enter. The hero announcement voice over the speakers declared Izumo the victor for capturing the weapon, but Bakugo refused to accept it and fired an explosion forward. Izuku removed the platform beneath him, letting himself fall. His powers faltered and he was unable to summon another platform. Expecting impact, Izuku instead found himself hovering a few centimeters above the ground. He turned and saw two large white wings briefly manifest behind him before they were wrapped in golden energy and vanished, causing him to lose lift and fall. He brushed off the dirt from his costume and moved on. He met Ida, who was supporting Izumo on his shoulder while Bakugo paced and continued to grumble in the distance. Izuku noticed two of them appeared hurt. Ida explained that Bakugo's punch had struck him in the gut, but he had managed to dodge enough to avoid the worst of it. Bakugo had injured his hand in the process. Izuku hoped his powers would still function. When he placed his hand on Ida's exposed chest, golden energy enveloped him and healed his injuries almost instantly. Ida, stunned, thanked Yagi-kun for the aid. Izuku corrected the name, indicating he preferred to be called Izuku and disliked his last name, and then touched Izumo's wound to heal him as well. Izumo took a steadying breath, thanked both of them, and then jumped off Ida's back. Ida remarked on Izuku's gentle nature and wondered why Bakugo was so cold toward him. Izumo lowered his gaze in shame and could not offer an answer. All Might later criticized Izuku's tactic as reckless, pointing out that removing the platform had nearly killed him. Izuku calmly explained that taking the fall would have resulted in more damage from the explosion and that his body could have sustained the descent with only some injuries, making it the better choice. All Might fell silent under Izuku's steady glare. Hagakure excitedly commented that the wings looked incredible, and Izuku said he had never summoned wings before and guessed it was a previously unknown aspect of his quirk. The students listened, some analyzing his strategy while others reacted more quietly. Aizawa and Nizu made careful notes of everything Izuku had done. The next day the students of 1A were in the usual chaos, buzzing about the trials and their fights. Before they could reach the school, a swarm of reporters confronted them with shouted questions asking what it was like to have All Might as a teacher, whether the symbol of peace was better at heroism or teaching, and whether he lived up to his legendary reputation. Some students commented that the public seemed overly fixated on All Might and that many other heroes also had impressive abilities, costumes, and presence. Izuku told the reporters they were wasting time that could be used to cover important events and issues around the country, then jumped into the school, ignoring the shouts of protest. Back in the classroom, everyone sat in a circle and chatted about their futures in heroics and teams. Momo suggested that at least they had Yagi to heal them and that he would be a great support hero on any team. Izuku responded that he was fine and asked everyone not to use Yagi when referring to him because he hated that name. Ojiro asked why, noting that Izumo did not seem to mind it. Izuku answered curtly that it was personal. Their conversation ended when Aizawa entered the room, making everyone slide back to their seats. Aizawa told them he had watched their trial battles and that they had done well overall, but he warned that Izumo and Bakugo had been extremely reckless with their powers. Izumo nodded and looked at his hands in shame, while Bakugo scowled. Aizawa then told Izuku that he had not been taking a fight as seriously as he should have, because he had been distracted, which was a weakness in battle. Izuku acknowledged the warning and promised to be more focused. Aizawa moved on to the day's announcements and told them they had something to do. The students groaned. Aizawa explained that they needed to choose a class representative and emphasized that the representative, along with the vice president, would be responsible for speaking to the principal or teachers on behalf of the class. Kirishima immediately declared he wanted to be representative, Kaminari shouted his own bid, and Mina offered excitedly that she could get new, flashier uniforms. Chaos erupted as students began campaigning. Izumo asked why they did not simply vote. Sato pointed out that they did not know each other well enough yet for a casual vote. Izuku suggested a different approach. They could check who had gained everyone's attention in the short time they had together. Izumo agreed that one did not need long to notice who seemed most unique. Aizawa, irritated, gave them until the end of the session to decide and told them to be quick and stop disturbing him. Izuku asked Yaoyorozu to create a box and small pieces of paper for voting. She complied and Izuku and Yaoyorozu distributed the papers. After the students voted, Aizawa counted the slips and wrote the results on the board. Izuku Yagi received 4 votes, Izumo Yagi received 3, and Momo Yaoyorozu received 2. The rest of the students had 1 or 0 votes. Izuku thanked everyone for trusting him and promised not to disappoint them. Izumo giggled and promised that the two of them would work together to ensure everyone's safety and happiness. Izuku stared at his brother for a few seconds, then looked toward the board as the classroom cheered. Bakugo sulked in his seat, clearly displeased. Izuku wondered who had voted for him. Izumo smiled at him and then looked away before the bell rang. When the bell sounded, everyone rushed toward the cafeteria. As Izuku ate with Todoroki, Izuku wondered aloud who had voted for him. Todoroki admitted that he had voted for him. Momo then told Izuku that she had voted for him because he had shown good planning and control in the past few days, and because he remained calm around All Might and other teachers' qualities she valued in a class representative. Jairu said she had voted because she thought he was cool. The mood shifted when a group of reporters rushed into the school and the school alarm began to blare. The alarm announced a level 3 security breach and instructed all students to calmly return to their classes and remain with their homeroom teachers. Panic spread as students stood and headed for the exits. Izuku immediately formed a shield around the classroom door, surprising everyone. He pointed out that the intruders were the press and suggested they had been used as a distraction. He reminded the class that the teachers were out in the halls and they could not simply leave. The students exchanged looks and returned to their seats. Someone muttered that Izuku was showing off. He ignored the remark and sat down. Momo complimented him on how he had stopped everyone from panicking. A chill ran down Izuku's spine, and he told Izumo that something felt wrong. He rose from his seat and hurried out of the cafeteria. Izumo followed, calling for Izuku to wait and rushing after him. They ran through the growing chaos toward what Izuku felt was the source of the strange aura, Nizu's office. Izuku burst through Nizu's office door. Drawers were open and ransacked, and part of the wall had been reduced to rubble. Izumo asked what had happened there. Izuku asked where Nizu was. Nizu then appeared in the office and identified himself as being present. Izuku asked if there were any cameras in the office. Nizu said there were, but they appeared to have been disabled beforehand. The staff did not know who had broken in or what had been taken. Izuku scoffed at how odd the situation was and asked aloud how anyone had known to break into that specific office, noting that the press had likely been used as a distraction. Nizu responded that he had sensed the disturbance. Izuku said he had detected a strange aura. Nizu nodded and told the two of them they were free to leave. Izuku and Izumo nodded and departed. Izumo asked whether someone was targeting their father. Izuku clicked his tongue and said he did not know and did not care, noting that heroes and their families were targeted all the time and their father was no exception. He mumbled that and rushed away. Izumo was left behind, confused, and wondered whether that meant Izuku would not care if he were targeted too. Aizawa announced that today's training session would be different. They would train at an off-campus facility focused on rescue training. Mina cheered that it was actual hero work, and Hagakure expressed excitement about rescue training. Aizawa added that there would be extra protection from nearby heroes, and that All Might, himself, and another facility member would be responsible for training them. Momo asked if this increased security was because of the recent break-in, and Aizawa confirmed that they needed more security since they would not be inside the school. Izuku and Izumo exchanged questioning looks, wondering whether the break-in culprit had been identified. Aizawa instructed that students could choose what to wear and that those staying in costume should go to the changing rooms and then to the buses in the parking lot. The students nodded and rushed to the changing rooms, and everyone decided to wear their costumes. Denki asked about the necklace Izuku was wearing, noting they did not see it while he was in his hero costume. Izuku explained it was just an accessory he liked to keep on and slipped the necklace into his pocket. Shiro commented that he had not noticed Izuku's costume had pockets. Izuku smiled and shrugged as he noticed Izumo staring, and he thought to himself that the necklace looked like one they had once gotten together, though he pushed the thought away. Izuku quickly put on his costume pieces and hurried out toward the buses. Aizawa asked whether Izuku could summon wings again. Izuku replied that it had happened once but not since. Aizawa said wings would be great for his speed and pointed out that mastering them could make him faster, using hawks as an example. Izuku considered that and nodded as more classmates arrived. Izuku asked everyone to board the bus slowly and take their seats. Everyone complied and rushed inside. Aizawa sighed and called them problem children. The bus left after Aizawa and Izuku stepped on board. Izuku sat next to Shuto, Momo, and Jairu, with Izumo, Tsu, Uraraka, and Ida seated in front of them. The students talked about quirks and future careers when Tsu commented that Izuku would be great both as a support hero for healing and as a battlefield fighter given his powers. She added that he and Yagi would make a great team if they did not dislike each other. Izuku started to respond before the bus doors opened and Aizawa announced their arrival. The students rushed outside and Izuku saw his brother looking at him with a tear in his eye. He hurried forward, clutching his pocket, determined not to be seen that way by others. At the entrance, the pro-hero 13 stood, drawing odd looks from the Yagis and Uraraka while Izuku talked about her abilities. Aizawa ordered everyone to head inside and said All Might would be arriving shortly. The students followed and found themselves in a huge center set up with different rescue scenarios. They stared in awe and debated where to begin. Suddenly the facility's electricity began to glitch and a purple warp gate opened in the middle of the center. Izuku sensed an unpleasant aura and said someone was doing something to the entire area. He ordered Ida to rush back to the school immediately. Ida hesitated but Aizawa urged him to listen and Ida ran outside. The students, except for Izumo, watched the interaction in confusion. A voice from the gate complained that the symbol of peace was not present and suggested hurting students to draw him out, making it clear they did not want anyone left alive. A man with blue hair spoke in agreement, expressing contempt. Mina asked why villains were here when the exercise was supposed to be rescue training, and Izuku explained that they were real villains masking their presence by disrupting the alarms and other electrical devices with a quirk. Aizawa ordered the pro-hero 13 to remain with the students while he dealt with the intruders and told Kaminari to try to reach the school using his quirk in case Ida could not get there in time. Aizawa jumped down into the center to confront the villains. Izuku followed him, summoning an energy shield. Aizawa questioned what the villains thought they were doing and kicked one of them back. Izuku warned that while many of the attackers were not particularly strong, a mist-like creature, the blue-haired man, and a strange bird-like figure were radiating powerful and dangerous auras. Working together in fluid, high-energy motion, Aizawa and Izuku pushed the attackers back, using coordinated maneuvers and defensive techniques that sent groups of villains tumbling away. The mist-like creature vanished and reappeared next to the students, demonstrating a teleportation or warp ability. Izuku noted that this mist must have some form of teleportation quirk, that the blue-haired man also seemed to possess a strong power, and that the bird-like figure was unusual. In an instant, the mist creature teleported the students to different locations throughout the facility, separating them from one another. Izuku observed that the creatures seemed to have more than one soul as he shielded himself from incoming gunfire. He noted that Ida still had not reached the school and that their devices were not functioning. He blasted a group of villains away, summoned another shield to block a man's attack, and then transformed the shield into an energy hand to seize the man and hurl him toward the blue-haired attacker. The blue-haired villain called him a brat, and Izuku sensed something behind him. He turned but was struck and slammed into the wall. He swallowed a rough breath and tried to steady himself as a bird-like creature lunged to strike again. Izuku formed a shield, but the bird shattered it with a brutal blow, leaving him coughing and reeling. The creature loomed over him, latched to the wall, and struck again. Izuku staggered, grimaced, and fired an energy blast that had no visible effect. The creature remained in place. Before he could bring a sword into being, the creature grabbed his arm and twisted it cruelly, causing him to cry out as the limb snapped. He braced himself and then realized the bird was being forced backward. Izumo had intervened, landing a punch after Aizawa neutralized the creature's quirk. That action, however, drew Aizawa's attention and left him vulnerable. The blue-haired villain reached for Aizawa's elbow and caused it to begin failing. Izuku sent a hard blast that knocked the villain's hand back and gave Aizawa a chance to pull to safety. Aizawa shouted Yagi, and Izuku's eyes widened as his vision began to darken. He could barely see. All he could make out was his brother and the creature. Izumo was suspended in the air by the creature, one leg and both arms twisted at odd angles. The monster let out an inhuman screech and tightened its hold, and Izumo strained for breath, barely able to speak his brother's name. Aizawa launched the blue-haired villain away, shouting for Izuku to calm down, but Izuku did not seem to register the command. Golden energy flared around his eyes and then his body. 4 immense wings unfolded, filling the facility with shimmering light. Energy radiated from him and his healed marks glowed as if being filled from within. He declared through raw, frantic force that they must take their hands off his brother. The creature screeched again but was cut off as Izuku surged forward. He struck the monster with a concentrated punch of energy that rattled the whole facility. Windows shattered and the ground trembled with the impact, sending shockwaves through heroes and villains. The creature was blasted out of the building and crashed into the street. An object slid from Izuku's pocket beside Izumo, and Izumo, attempting to stand, managed to whisper his brother's name. An energy shield snapped into place around Izumo and the fallen object. Izuku launched himself out of the facility and chased the creature across the ruined streets. The monster finally slammed into a building and skidded to a halt, then leapt to strike again. Izuku's hand glowed with energy and he sent the creature flying once more, generating more shockwaves that cracked the surrounding glass. Izuku proclaimed that no one would hurt his brother and formed a concentrated orb of energy. The orb swelled until it dwarfed the surrounding buildings, then he released it. The resulting blast consumed the creature and caused severe damage to nearby structures. Sirens and screams rose from the crowd, but Izuku was focused only on the threat as the creature began to recuperate. A barrage of debris and objects shot toward him, and he incinerated them with another blast. A voice complained about lost feathers. Hawks had arrived and barely dodged the attack. Izuku sent another energy strike that sent Hawks tumbling through a row of buildings. Before Izuku could pursue either the creature or the airborne hero, he himself was struck and driven through more structures. All Might announced his presence from the rooftop of a nearby building, and Magnetica declared that they were there to help as well. Izuku or whatever force held him registered those voices and demanded, in a fierce, single-minded way, that his brother be returned to him. He rushed All Might, and the pro-hero reacted quickly, deflecting the blow and setting off another outward shockwave. Inko Uraraka launched rocks toward Izuku, urging him to stop. He continued to press, eyes shut, and released a massive burst of energy from his torso that pulverized the incoming stones. An unfamiliar voice intervened and managed to restrain Izuku briefly. Flames erupted across Izuku's body as another hero tested him with fire. He screamed and fought to break free, but All Might intervened again, sending both Izuku and Endeavor backward with a heavy strike. Izuku maintained his cry that no one should touch his brother. Endeavor reacted with confusion and then suddenly found himself and others encased in ice that gleamed with an odd golden light. Endeavor unleashed a stream of fire against Izuku while Magnetica hurled larger projectiles. Hawks added a volley of sharp feathers. All Might charged forward to strike, but a powerful sweep of wind from Izuku's wings sent the coordinated attacks and the pro-hero's momentum off balance, slowing All Might's advance. Izuku continued to demand his brother, his voice breaking and stammering as the conflict reached a chaotic peak. Izuku's voice lowered as the energy around him faded and he collapsed, unable to move. The heroes turned and saw Aizawa with his quirk activated and Izumo standing beside him unharmed, clutching a small gold piece. Endeavor asked whether that was the villain who had entered the school. Aizawa replied that it was not a villain but a student, surprising the number 2 and 3 heroes. Hawks commented that he had never expected Eraserhead to be funny and suggested, half-joking, that they should go on a mission together. Aizawa answered coldly that he did not joke, and Hawks expressed disbelief. Endeavor then asked incredulously if they were saying a student had fought against the 4 top pro heroes. Aizawa explained that the boy would never cause so much damage on his own and that it looked as if something had taken control of him when he saw his brother hurt. The number 3 hero asked whether the brother had been hurt. Izumo immediately explained that Izuku had healed him. Inko suggested they discuss details later and warned that whatever had taken hold of the boy might still be present. The heroes rushed to where Izuku had fallen and noticed golden energy flowing from his body. Hawks wondered if he still had stamina, but Aizawa stopped him. Suddenly, a burst of energy pulsed from Izuku. All Might shouted for them to stop him, and the group prepared to intervene. Before they could act, the energy spread outward and the scene shifted. Rubble and debris hovered briefly, encircled in golden light, then slowly reassembled into place in an almost serene, anime-like reversal of destruction. Cracks closed, broken windows resealed, and buildings that had been damaged were restored as if a deliberate, restorative force was at work. Endeavor exclaimed that the boy was fixing everything. Aizawa pointed out that the hero still bore damage from the earlier confrontation. Izumo added that Izuku was repairing the damage he had caused and noted that even while unconscious he would never accept leaving so much destruction. Izumo moved to his brother, his eyes wet, and held him close before placing a heart-shaped necklace on Izuku's chest. The pendant contained a small picture of the 2 brothers. It was the necklace they shared. Hawks asked whether all of that had happened because Izuku's brother had been hurt. Aizawa nodded. Izumo clutched his brother and sobbed quietly, telling him that he did care about him. The day Izuku lost control left a deep impression on everyone. Many civilians who had witnessed the event were understanding, noting that the crowd had been protected by shields, no one had been hurt, and the student had repaired the damage afterward. A woman who had been interviewed urged others not to keep criticizing a child who had been overwhelmed. Other civilians who had not been present were more critical, arguing that someone capable of such destruction should not be allowed to be a hero and suggesting stricter measures for control. The pro-heroes faced questions as well. Endeavor defended their restraint by saying they had acted to avoid creating more destruction and could have subdued the boy if necessary. Hawks framed the incident as evidence of a powerful upcoming generation of heroes and suggested the public should be grateful rather than fearful. All Might called the reaction an overreaction, saying it had been a frightened kid and that things would be different in a true villain fight. Magnetica declined to comment. Meanwhile, Izuku remained in the hospital, unconscious from the stress his body had endured. During the week he was asleep, Aizawa and the boys' classmates took turns visiting, but Izumo stayed constantly, traveling between the school and the hospital. Hawks paid a discreet visit through a window, saying he had come to check on the boy because he had taken an interest. After a week, Izuku stirred and opened his eyes, coughing as he took in his surroundings. Izumo was standing by the door and rushed across the room. He embraced his brother and patted his back, relieved that Izuku was awake. Izuku coughed and told him to get off, trying to regain his composure. Izumo told him to stop acting tough, produced Izuku's necklace from his pocket, and returned it. Izuku blushed and snatched the necklace away, looking down. Izumo poured water from the nearby table and offered it. Izuku apologized, wrapping his arms around his legs in embarrassment. Izumo sat beside him and told him that he had nothing to be sorry about and that he was the one who was sorry. Izuku confessed that he had not been able to face his brother after attempting to harm himself and that he had felt weak whenever Izumo came near. Izumo's expression changed. He took Izuku's hand and reassured him that he was not weak and that they had been the ones who had pushed him too far. Izumo rambled that if he had known someone hurt Izuku, he would have ended them. He never wanted Izuku to get hurt. He admitted he had tried to push Izuku away from becoming a hero because he could not bear to see him injured, but he had recently realized that Izuku had never been weak and had always been the strongest person he had known. Izuku broke down in tears, and his brother moved closer to hug him. This time Izuku returned the embrace. Izuku asked whether he had hurt anyone after losing control, recalling only attacking the bird creature and their parents. Izumo reassured him that he had not hurt anyone except for injuring 4 top pro heroes, who would recover, and mentioned that Izuku had told their parents to give him back his brother, which Izumo had found touching. Izuku mumbled in response, and Izumo noted that Izuku had called him brother about 5 times and that it had felt nice. Izuku nodded, still blushing with embarrassment. Izumo, his eyes tearing up, said he would love to be Izuku's big brother again. That finally broke through to Izuku, who tightened the hug and sobbed, stuttering that he would love that too. Izumo smiled, he had his brother back. They stayed in silence for a few minutes until Izuku sighed and asked how everyone in class was. Izumo explained that none of the classmates had been seriously hurt, the villains had fled after Izuku's breakdown, and everyone was currently training. When Izuku asked what for, Izumo said it was for the school's sports festival and added that they had a week to train and that Izuku could learn to use his wings until then. Izuku looked around in shock and then saw 2 huge wings, each nearly his size, extending from his shoulder blades. He mumbled to himself about his wings. Izumo smiled and touched one of them, joking that they had thought he might become an angel in heaven and that they had gotten one part right. Izuku chuckled and nodded. They had indeed gotten one part right. Izuku hated every second after leaving the hospital. People recognized him and mumbled when they saw his face, calling him the USJ kid and commenting on how he did not look as evil as he acted and how surprising it was that someone so pretty could cause so much damage. Izuku muttered that he would have to deal with everyone's opinions whether he had a quirk or not and stepped into his classroom. Momo was the first to call his name when he entered, his wings dragging on the ground behind him. Izuku greeted the class enthusiastically, and the students rushed over to compliment his strength. Kaminari, thrilled and shaken, told him it had been scary but really cool. Izuku offered a hesitant thanks and raised a thumb. Kirishima admitted he had never expected Izuku to risk so much for Yagi and said he was now afraid of fighting him, and Mina added that Izuku had gone all out after they had hurt Yagi. Izumo teased that Izuku was being a protective younger brother while sticking his tongue out from a table. Izuku rolled his eyes and warned Izumo not to take it for granted, sticking his tongue back in return. The classroom fell quiet with confusion when some students tried to chime in, and Siro cut himself off when he noticed Izumo glaring. Izuku asked if there were 5 more days until the festival as he sat beside his brother. Momo explained that the festival would be a great chance to show abilities to pro heroes and that internships could follow, giving choices for sidekick positions. Izuku nodded as classmates continued to chat, though one hero in particular had captured his interest. At the end of the day, students gathered at the classroom door, blocking it. Mina demanded to know who they were, and Bakugo snapped that they were students from other classes scouting the competition. The door opened to reveal students screaming at Class 1A. A blonde boy remarked that these were the students everyone had been talking about and called them show-offs. Bakugo threatened the blonde, who smirked and retorted that none of them seemed heroic and accused Izuku of destroying 4 buildings, pointing at him. Izuku scoffed, and Izumo stepped forward and asked the blonde if he wanted to be punched by the reason for the destruction. The blonde reacted in surprise, and Izumo prepared to strike. But Izuku stopped him, telling him that taking out insecurities on others was embarrassing. The muttering from the crowd made the blonde feel ashamed, and when he lunged toward Izuku, a girl struck his neck and knocked him out, explaining that he did not always realize what he said. Several other students tried to push their way in, but only one managed. a tired-looking purple-haired boy who sneered that the hero course must be nice for a group of blessed teens with powerful quirks. Izuku moved to respond, and Izumo gripped his shoulder to keep him in check. The purple-haired student continued, calling them blessed children who did not know what it was like to struggle with bad quirks, and pushed Izuku toward his limit. Izuku snapped back that the boy had no idea who he was talking to. He explained that he had been quirkless for 13 years and that his quirk had activated after a suicide attempt that pushed his body to the point where it had to activate to keep him alive. Most of the students fell silent, shocked, and only Izumo tightened his grip on Izuku's hand. Slowly, the other students retreated without a word. The following day was quiet, with everyone watching Izuku with either pity or shock. He told them that it was no longer a big deal and that they should not think his experiences had changed anything. The next days passed quickly as Izuku and the others had little to do besides train and listen to Izuku explain things whenever he was asked. While they trained, they all noticed they had become the focus of attention. The class moved toward the center of the sports festival stadium as the crowd cheered. Izumo mumbled that it felt awkward to see so many people as he walked behind Izuku. Izuku noted that the crowd remembered them as the class who survived USJ and remembered him as the boy who had fought many villains and nearly caused massive chaos. The other classes were introduced, though they did not receive as loud a reception as Class 1A. Midnight announced the introductory speech in her hero costume, prompting an uproar from the crowd. Kirishima observed that someone should speak to Midnight about her costume. Kaminari joked that it should come with a warning. Tokoyami wondered whether it was even approved for a school event. Izuku rolled his eyes, uninterested. Izumo teased that perhaps Hawks could present in Izuku's place and giggled. Izuku blushed and protested, denying any simple association and telling his brother not to assume things about him, which made Izumo laugh harder. The heroine announced that Izuku Yagi of Class 1A would deliver the student pledge. Izuku swallowed and hurried to the stage where Midnight stood. The crowd murmured about him. Izuku stated that he hoped the festival would be a chance to show their powers and prove that the next generation of heroes could protect the world, and that everyone would have an equal chance to shine so no one would be left out. He then stepped away from the microphone. Midnight commented that his approach was safe and likely intended to catch the attention of the heroes. Izuku shrugged and smiled, admitting that it might be a tactic if it worked, fine. If not, he was bluffing. Midnight chuckled. Some in the crowd cheered loudly while others glared and murmured. Midnight giggled and called his speech heroic before moving on to the main event, which sent the crowd into an uproar. Izuku muttered that he needed someone important to notice him because only that person could help him. Midnight activated a screen that spun through names and landed on the obstacle race as the first game. Izuku smirked. Izumo looked uneasy, this not being his strong suit. Midnight explained that all 11 classes would participate in a 4-kilometer race around the stadium and added, in a teasing tone, that she would not be restraining anyone in this segment. Izuku thought someone in the crowd might have fainted. Midnight made it clear that as long as participants stayed on course, they were free to act as they pleased. Izuku and the others nodded, and Izuku noted that fights and offensive attacks would be allowed as they headed to the starting gate. 3 green lights hung above the entrance. Izuku watched them fade one by one. Izuku encouraged Izumo to push himself, reminding him that a race was not his strongest event and urging him to show the world he could be a symbol of peace. Before Izumo could answer, Izuku surprised everyone by extending his wings, smirking, and taking his brother's hands. As the last light went out, Izuku accelerated while holding Izumo. Once clear of the gate, he released him with a smile and wished his big brother luck, noting he could not provide any more assistance. The announcer's voice rang through the speakers as the students surged into the course. Izuku led the pack, followed by Todoroki, who used his ice to freeze and traverse the ground. Many of those who managed to avoid obstacles were Class 1A students accustomed to Todoroki's quirk. A large robot approached, and Izuku noted it was using the same tactics they had faced before. He passed through and sliced through the robot with his wings, disabling it. More robots hurried toward him, and he worried they would waste time. He apologized to the others and unleashed a series of controlled explosions that disabled the robots and left rubble to impede the following students. he propelled himself upward to fly above the robots. Some tried to fire at him, but he blocked their attacks with a protective field. He continued to fly and noticed Izumo rising on a piece of metal that Izuku had levitated to carry him. Izuku called out encouragement to his brother and flicked his wings to accelerate. He continued to propel himself repeatedly, followed closely by Izumo, Bakugo, and Todoroki. They cleared the robot-filled section and reached the second stage, a canyon with ropes meant for students to balance across to reach the connecting hills. Plan formed in Izuku's mind. He warned the others that the ropes would not hold for long, then used energy to temporarily disable the ropes and hills, preventing anyone from standing on or holding them. He flew onward toward the third obstacle, with students who could fly or make large jumps following him. Izumo noted that Izuku was slowing down, and indeed Izuku felt his speed decrease with each passing moment. His wings were still untrained, and flying at such speed quickly fatigued them. Izuku smirked and told his brother that he did not rely on his speed only to finish the race. Izumo glanced confused for a moment, but Izuku only smirked harder and pointed at the ground beneath them. They were in the third obstacle, the minefield. Izuku taunted that he hoped everyone liked explosions, then unleashed a straight line of energy that detonated the mines behind him and sent several contestants tumbling backward. Izuku kept flying forward while firing energy blasts to block anyone who tried to close in. Izumo used the blasts to his advantage, letting the detonations push him forward while he stayed balanced on his metallic platform. The green-haired boy was about to cross the finish line when Izuku surged ahead, crossing less than a second before his brother. Mike announced that the Yagi twins had taken the top 2 spots and praised their display of power. The crowd erupted in cheers. Izuku assumed most of the cheering was for Izumo. Izumo draped a hand over Izuku's shoulder and told him to cheer up, reminding him he had won the first part. Izuku mumbled that he did not know if people would ever forgive him for losing control. Izumo sighed and scoffed that they would, and if they did not, he would make them. Izuku laughed that it probably did not work that way as they watched the others rush into the winning stadium. Midnight announced the final standings and the next phase of the festival. Izuku Yagi in first, Izumo Yagi second, followed by Shudo Todoroki and Katsuki Bakugo. She noted that the students of Class 1A were standing out so far. The students of 1A who had passed cheered loudly while the rest of the class watched with narrowed eyes. In total, 42 students had passed, mostly from 1A and 1B. Midnight then explained the next game, the Cavalry battle, and its rules. She said the teams would form in groups of 2 to 4 and that each team's point value would be the sum of its members' scores from the obstacle race. The points increased by 5 per tier. She emphasized that the contestant who scored first had a special value, 10 million points. That announcement made Izuku suddenly realize the consequences of his victory as many classmates shot hostile looks at him. Midnight described the objective. Each team would be handed headbands corresponding to their group's points, and contestants were to grab as many headbands as possible and have them wrapped around their necks. Quirks could be used freely, except for actions that would cause life-threatening harm. Students would have 10 minutes to find teammates and 15 minutes for the actual battle. Izuku sighed. He already disliked this contest. Izumo tapped Izuku's shoulder and asked if he wanted to team up. Izuku smiled and answered that it was not a question, and the two shared a grin. Izumo called to Tenya Ida and Achiko Uraraka, asking them to join. Ida declined, explaining that he could not simply follow someone because they were powerful. He needed to challenge himself to grow stronger. Izumo looked disappointed, but Izuku was not surprised. Their classmates were wary of them. Izuku muttered that it was expected. Because they had scored the highest, they would be targeted, and no one wanted to team with that kind of attention. Izuku pointed out that only Izumo seemed interested in joining. A girl then approached, offering to join Izuku's team. Izuku stepped back slightly, noting her proximity. The girl, an inventor, rambled about using Izuku as a test subject for her devices to attract the attention of top pro heroes. She offered to examine his equipment later and suggested that Izumo could use some assistance because his hands often suffered damage when he used his quirk. Izuku responded by talking about equipment and powers to keep the conversation going. Uraraka asked if Izumo would waste the team's precious time talking. Izumo explained that Izuku trusted his own ability to handle opponents. Izumo accepted being on the team because he was family, not because Izuku needed help. He added that the same reasoning applied to Uraraka and the inventor. Izuku kept people around because of his connections or the way they sparked his interest. The inventor nodded while she and Izuku continued to chat. Minutes later, the clock began to count down and everyone prepared. Uraraka and the inventor stood on solid ground supporting Izuku on their shoulders. Izuku outlined their plan. They would not focus on offense but on protecting their personal headband, since their score was already high enough to secure advancement. Mike announced that team formations were complete and that the battle was starting. He counted down, and when he reached 1 the teams surged forward. Izuku smirked, but then the ground beneath him began to turn into quicksand. A member of Class 1B declared that they had the Yagi team trapped and rushed in. The inventor offered her gadgets, but Izuku declined. He then generated an energy field that formed a levitating bubble around his small group, the shield glittering in the sunlight. Bakugo prepared an explosive attack aimed at Izuku while Todoroki launched an ice assault. Izuku closed his eyes briefly, uncertain how to respond while enclosed in the energy bubble. He looked at his teammates and saw them wide-eyed. The orb began to drift higher than it normally would. Izuku murmured in confusion as a wave of dizziness washed over him and wondered what had happened. Mei exclaimed that they had just appeared there as she looked down at the studium. From Izuku's vantage point, everyone below looked like ants. That perspective persisted through the entire exam as the team teleported from place to place while the white-haired teen grew increasingly dizzy. Uraraka asked whether he was done throwing up. Izumo shook his head and explained that Izuku had been in the bathroom ever since Present Mike announced their win. This ability of his seemed to have a heavy backlash. Mei wondered if Izumo had ever seen Izuku use the power, and Izumo said he had not. Izuku never failed to surprise him with new things. After minutes of sickness and clutching his stomach, Izuku finally stepped out of the bathroom stall. Izumo ruffled his hair and remarked that he looked roughed up. Izuku admitted the ordeal had drained him and was grateful for the break before the battle tournament. He doubted he could have fought in that state. He splashed water on his face and sighed. Izumo summarized the winners: Todoroki's team, Kaken's team, and the teams of the blonde student and the purple-haired boy. Izumo suggested Izuku might get the chance to face the two brats. Izuku asked about Todoroki, noting the boy seemed eager for his headband. Izumo confirmed Todoroki had seemed upset and had asked to meet them alone, but Izuku had been incapacitated. Izumo laughed at the timing. They went to where Shodo waited. The twins stood before him, expecting him to speak, but Shodo only stared, making them uncomfortable. Shodo questioned whether Izuku had fought his father after losing control in USJ, and Izuku nodded. Shodo said his father had been furious not only because someone had stood up to him, but also because Izuku seemed connected to All Might. The twins froze. Their father's identity was supposed to be a secret. Shodo explained that his father had overheard All Might and his wife talking to Izuku as if they had known him for a long time, and Shodo had sensed something familiar when Izuku used his quirk, an echo of All Might's power. Shodo demanded to know the nature of Izuku's relationship with All Might because if the two of them were related to him, they would be rivals. Izumo opened his mouth to respond, but Izuku cut him off and asked why Shodo cared so much about All Might and how their connection would affect Shodo or his father. Shodo replied that it was a long story and that if he explained, he expected answers in return. Izumo hesitated, but Izuku, noting the status of All Might and Endeavor as top heroes, argued that any grudge against All Might could be used against Endeavor. Izumo sighed and gave his promise. Shodo began to explain his family background. He said his father had always hated All Might and had wanted to surpass him. To counteract a weakness caused by his heat-based quirk, his father had arranged a marriage to create a child with both ice and fire traits and attempt to craft a weapon to rival All Might. Shoto said he was born with the quirk his father desired, and because of that, he had been excluded from his siblings and deprived of normal family interactions. Shoto added that his memories of his mother were dominated by her cries and a single painful image from his childhood. His father had committed his mother to a mental hospital, and Shoto had vowed never to use his fire in battle because of that. He told the twins that Izuku had forced him to break that vow when they had fought and his ice could not reach Izuku, so he had blasted with fire in frustration. Shoto resented Izuku not only for that but also because of Izuku's connection to the man who had caused his family's suffering. The twins fell silent for a moment, then Izuku looked into Shoto's pale eyes with a tender expression Shoto could barely recognize. Izuku offered sympathy for Shoto's past and said it was not the moment to waste time, he would keep his end of the promise. Izumo then revealed that they were All Might's sons, which visibly shocked Shoto. Izuku explained that they had been born alike, two boys with identical features and similar personalities who were treated equally at first. A few days after Izumo displayed signs of telekinetic ability, they underwent a quirk check. After that day, everyone's behavior toward Izuku changed. They discovered Izuku was quirkless, and their parents reacted terribly. Izuku was judged useless and neglected. For 10 years he was excluded from family events and subjected to physical and verbal abuse. Shoto reacted with disbelief at the idea that All Might and Magnetica could be abusive. Izuku, quiet and bitter, described how the symbol of peace had been blind to his suffering, failing to notice his son being bullied and harmed, failing to notice him becoming ill, and failing to notice how uncomfortable he was around men. Izuku revealed that he had been mistreated in ways that made him uncomfortable. The conversation grew heavy, but the students held to their promises and preparations as they moved forward toward the upcoming tournament. Izuku admitted that everything had been making him feel disgusted. Izumo fell silent, trying to hide his tears. Izuku reached out to touch Izumo's shoulder to calm him, and Izumo immediately responded with a hug. Izuku mumbled an apology for having pushed Izumo away and for never defending him, and Izuku reassured him that it was okay and they should just keep going as Izuku patted his back. Shoto asked whether that was why Izuku had always been angry whenever All Might was around and why he had shouted at All Might and Magnetica to give him his brother back when he had lost control. Izuku said he did not remember the incident clearly, but whatever had been controlling him likely knew he resented Izumo staying with them. Shoto wondered if Izuku forgave Izumo. Izuku explained that he had never held a grudge against Izumo and would never hate his older brother, which made both boys crack a small smile. Izuku added that he could not forgive his parents, because they had never apologized. Shoto shot back that his own father had not apologized to anyone either and seemed unaware of how he had messed up. Izuku observed that the sons of the top two pro heroes expected more than they received, despite their family status. Shoto asked what Izuku planned to do now that he was essentially alone. Izuku replied that he was alive and had his brother. He did not need their approval and intended to win the sports festival to prove that the quirkless kid they had despised was not useless. Shoto said he shared a similar goal and planned to win without using his fire to prove to his father that he did not need those powers. Izuku warned him not to do that, arguing that refusing to use his full potential would negate the suffering his mother and siblings had endured and would only force his father to resort to more extreme measures to achieve his aims. Shoto admitted that he hated his father's side of the family and everything that made him feel connected to them. Izumo then spoke up, saying he understood how Shoto felt. He began to explain what had happened when Izuku had appeared to die. He remembered someone urging him to throw himself off a roof and wish for a quirk in another life, but he had not followed that advice because he still held on to some hope. Later, he was attacked by a villain and nearly suffocated. The aftermath had been humiliating. He had not been rescued as he expected, and the hero who was supposed to help him instead taunted him for being vulnerable and told him that someone like him could never be a hero. Learning that his father was that hero had shattered him. When Shoto asked whether Izumo had tried to end his own life after that, Izumo confirmed that he had made an attempt. He clarified that it had not been from a building but from a cliff because he had not wanted anyone to find him. When the attempt occurred, a quirk activated to save his life. His previous body was left behind and a new one formed to suit his abilities. Izumo's eyes widened with the memory, and Shoto realized that their family ties did not define who Izumo had become. Izuku explained that genes did not define a person and that he had chosen Izumo as his brother. He repeated that only the individual decided how to live their life. Shoto admitted that it was a comforting way to look at things. Izuku prompted Izumo to continue, and Izumo wiped his tears and explained that after Izuku's apparent death his body had changed and they had discovered another quirk, a body-enhancing ability that had caused him harm in the past. He said he had stopped using his quirks for a time and had vowed not to become a hero because he felt unworthy after failing to save the person he had promised to pursue that path with. But a part of him insisted that Izuku would have hated to see him give up, so he returned to hero work and to using his abilities. He had initially relied on telekinesis and avoided direct combat, but when he learned Izuku was alive, he trained his body so he could protect his younger brother. Both boys' expressions softened at that confession. Izuku was moved to tears. Izumo turned to Izuku and promised that he would not fail him this time and that he would protect him even if it cost everything. Izuku finally broke and embraced Izumo tightly. Izumo returned the hug with equal strength. Shinszo watched from a short distance, awkward and unsure how to respond. Izuku opened his wings and invited Shinszo to join them. Shinszo hesitated, awkward at the thought of joining his newfound brothers, but Izumo offered an arm as well. With a gentle nudge from Izuku, Shinszo stepped forward and the three of them shared a warm, supportive embrace. Izuku laughed softly and welcomed Todoroki into their makeshift family. Izumo added that, since they all had broken relationships with their parents, they might as well consider themselves brothers in spirit. Shinszo protested that it was not that simple, and Izumo replied that it was more of a hopeful, hypothetical bond, but the moment had already settled between them. Izumo shouted that if anyone understood him, it was them, which made them closer than the rest and, in his words, like brothers. The other boy mumbled that he had always wondered what it was like to actually have brothers to spend time with. Izuku giggled and welcomed him to the family. The boy cracked a smile and finally joined the hug, embracing the two, and the moment ended with him murmuring family as the chapter closed. Mike announced that the 16 students who had passed the cavalry battle would now display their powers in a tournament. He explained that the students would be placed in one-on-one competitions and would use their abilities to knock out their opponents, force them out of the stage boundaries, or make them give up. The crowd cheered loudly, making communication difficult for the contestants, while excitement and determination glowed in the students' expressions. Midnight called the students forward to draw lots for the first matches and mentioned that they could enjoy the recreational games the school had provided. Ejiro raised his hand and apologized before announcing that he was withdrawing, shocking everyone. He explained that he could not forget the end of the cavalry battle and believed the purple-haired teen's quirk had influenced the outcome. Izuku stared for a moment and then scoffed. Ejiro insisted that he had thought it through and refused to advance if it meant being someone's puppet. Another student, Nairenjiki Shota from Class 1B, stepped forward and joined the withdrawal, declaring that no matter how powerful he was, passing in such a way went against the festival's spirit. Aoyama complimented their nobility, and others agreed. Midnight reacted with a dramatic exclamation, calling their choice naive but clearly entertained by their conviction. Izuku muttered that it was more than she needed to say, and Izumo began a retort until Izuku glared at him and warned that one more comment about a certain hero would get him barred from the tournament. Izumo shivered briefly, stuck out his tongue, and backed down with a huff and a giggle. Because two students had withdrawn, Midnight said two replacements would be selected from the team that had placed fifth. The leader of that team argued that they had been frozen most of the time and suggested choosing students from the team that had fought the entire time instead. Tetsu and his teammate Ibara stepped in to replace the withdrawn contestants, and the draws began. The matches were scheduled in this order: Izuku vs. Shinszo, Mina vs. Aoyama, Ibara vs. Denki, Ida vs. Mei, Izumo vs. Momo, Todoroki vs. Siro, Kirishima vs. Tetsu, and Bakugo vs. Uraraka. Izuku declared that he would handle Shinszo. The purple-haired teen watched him and exchanged a brief look. Ojiro warned Izuku not to answer, wrapping his tail briefly around Izuku's mouth to stop him and explaining that Shinszo could control minds with his quirk. The purple-haired student smirked and walked away. During the break, Izuku and the others took a longer rest to prepare while friends enjoyed the recreational games. Izuku explained that Shinszo wanted to win to enter the hero course, since homeroom teachers sometimes welcomed strong general studies students into the course. Izumo teased that Kaken had been muttering about wanting to defeat Izuku, causing Izuku to choke on his water before shaking it off. Izuku assessed the bracket privately, calculating that after Shinszo he might face Mina or Aoyama, and later Ida, whose speed would be an annoyance but not insurmountable. The real obstacle, he thought, would be the finals, where he might face Kaken, Shoto, or Izumo. He believed that even if Uraraka upset Kaken, she would not stand a chance against Shoto. Shinszo taunted that ignoring one's opponent was rude, and Izuku continued to wait for the match to begin. Mike introduced the first fight, Izuku Yagi against Hitoshi Shinszo, and the crowd cheered. The referee counted down, and when the match began Izuku rushed forward. Shinszo quickly provoked him, acknowledging Izuku's strength and the usefulness of his quirk, and the two launched into a fast-paced, anime-style exchange of moves without any graphic detail. The fight unfolded as a dynamic display of skill and strategy. Shinszo shouted that people like Izuku were the ones allowed to show their pride, not people like that boy who had given up. Izuku felt the anger rise but stayed silent after Ojiro cautioned him not to respond. Izuku spread his wings and began to levitate. An energy orb formed in his arms and swelled as wind gathered and twirled around it. Shinszo continued to insist that Izuku's presence alone could make others tremble, that he had the power of a hero while those with villainous quirks suffered. Izuku did not answer. He raised the energy orb, ready to release it, but then looked at Shinszo with a trace of pity and thought that he was sorry for what had happened to him. He cancelled the orb and let it vanish. Closing his wings, he walked toward Shinszo, who rushed forward declaring that he would not give up. Izuku smiled and braced himself against the incoming punch. Their eyes met, and Izuku's aura softened, giving Shinszo a brief, warm reassurance before the younger boy was knocked back outside the boundaries. Izuku told Shinszo that he was powerful but that he complained more than he fought, allowing his quirk to feel like a burden instead of becoming a weapon. He offered to train him and used his energy to heal the bruise on Shinsu's stomach. Shinszo murmured that Izuku was blessed with a heroic quirk. Izuku admitted that he had pushed himself hard to gain his power and asked Shinszo to let him show what strength could be. The two exchanged a hesitant handshake, and Mike announced excitedly that Izuku appeared angelic in both appearance and heart, urging everyone to show their support. The crowd erupted in cheering. Izuku looked around at so much attention and smiled. The recognition felt good. Izuku returned to the waiting room as others cheered and encouraged Shinszo forward. He settled in to watch the remaining matches. The fights came one after another, most ending as Izuku had expected. Mina tricked Aoyama and knocked him out to secure her win. Ida won after Mei treated her match like a demonstration for her gadgets and chose to step out of the boundaries, forfeiting. Ibra outlasted Denki by shielding herself and forcing him to overuse his quirk. Izumo and Todoroki finished their matches quickly. Izumo continuously overwhelmed Momo, while Todoroki froze Siro and a large section of the arena as he demonstrated control without strain. Kirishima and Tetsutetsu both showed great resilience, ultimately deciding their contest with an arm wrestling match. Bakugo and Uraraka surprised many by delivering a fierce battle. Uraraka's tricks kept Bakugo off balance, but he eventually overpowered her. The next set of matches began. Izuku vs Mina, Ida vs Ibra, Izumo vs Todoroki, and Bakugo vs Kirishima. The crowd cheered as Izuku and Mina stepped into the arena, while some spectators voiced disapproval of the winged team. Mina admitted she expected to lose but declared she would not give up without a fight. Izuku tilted his head, inviting her to continue, and returned her determination with a confident smile, saying he would not give up either. Mike signaled the start of the match. Mina charged, and Izuku focused on defense. He slipped past her rush, jumped back, and fired a series of controlled energy blasts. Some strikes landed and knocked her off balance, but she kept coming until Izuku adjusted his distance and fired again, sending her backward. She tried to respond, but another well-placed blast sent her tumbling off the stage. The announcer declared Izuku the winner, and the crowd echoed the announcement. Izuku commended Mina for her effort and offered a friendly piece of advice as he extended his hand. She accepted, stood, and smiled before he returned to the viewing room to watch the remaining matches. Ida had dispatched Ibra with efficiency, earning him the next match against Izuku. Bakugo and Kirishima's bout was a display of offense versus defense, with Bakugo's power ultimately tipping the scales. Izumo and Todoroki's clash, however, was intense and destructive in spectacle. Izumo unleashed relentless attacks while Todoroki countered with fire, and their collision sent shockwaves through the arena and left heavy damage in its wake. Heroes had to step in to secure the area, and when the match concluded, Todoroki was declared the winner. Watching his injured brother, Izuku hurried over to find Izumo being assisted. Todoroki muttered an apology after seeing Izuku approach. Izuku looked puzzled and held his brother as he told Todoroki that he had done well. He channeled his energy to soothe Izumo and help him recover. Todoroki admitted that he had hurt him, and Izuku replied that in a fight, hurting each other was part of the process. They had done what was necessary and could be proud. Todoroki took a step back, feeling a comforting warmth wrap around him that had nothing to do with his own fire. Izuku asked Todoroki to promise to defeat Kaken and face him in the finals, then flew off to settle Izumo into the resting room. As Izuku left, a voice shouted for someone to get away. He offered a visible scoff that Inko and Tashinori noticed. Izuku told them that his brother was none of their business and began to leave, but Inko reached for his hand and praised how well he had done and how impressive his power was. Izuku pulled his hand away and glared, retorting that if she wanted to care, she should show it. He rushed away as his name and Ida's were called. Present Mic announced the semifinals, Tenya Ida versus Izuku Yagi as the two stepped onto the stage. Ida told Izuku that he had already lost the fight. Izuku asked why. Ida explained that he would not stand a chance against him and addressed him formally. Izuku accused him of giving up, anger evident in his tone. Ida said that sometimes a hero's strength is knowing his limits. He could not defeat Izuku yet but promised he would one day, and at least be able to put up a fight until then. Izuku sighed and asked for a promise. Ida confirmed the promise. With that, the speedster stepped off the stage, surprising everyone. Present Mic then announced Izuku Yagi as the winner. Izuku spread his wings and flew toward the announcement room. He asked Present Mic for the microphone and was given it. Izuku accepted the win but insisted that Ida was as much a winner for recognizing his limits and preserving his pride and power for later. Ida's eyes widened. Izuku praised Ida as the right kind of hero for thinking everything through and asked that Ida receive as much applause as he had earned. The crowd erupted into cheers that filled the stadium. Izuku focused instead on the soft thank you Ida had mumbled under his breath. A voice offstage murmured that he was cute, sounding oddly fixated. Izumo, who had recently awakened, told Izuku that many were fighting to face him. Izuku stretched without replying. Izumo added that Shoto wanted to fight to fulfill a promise and Kaken wanted to fight to prove himself. Izuku argued that Kaken needed no proof and reminded Izumo that he no longer felt bound by the promise their brother had broken. Izumo sighed and nodded, acknowledging Izuku's stance. Present Mic announced the winner of the second semifinal, Shuto Todoroki. Izuku muttered that they would have to face off again. The announcement caused a stir among the audience. The match between Izuku and Shuto began. Izuku noted that he had not expected Shuto to use his fire against Kaken and was quietly glad. Shuto recalled that he had promised to fight Izuku. When the start was signaled, Shuto opened with an ice attack. Izuku countered by moving his wings forward, creating a shockwave that broke the ice and sent Shuto backward. Izuku urged Shuto to show everything he had. Shuto formed a shield of ice behind him to avoid being blown out of bounds. Energy blasts streamed toward Shuto. He responded by forming a front shield that was soon overwhelmed as more blasts shattered it. A beam from Izuku struck Shuto's left hand, and Izuku urged him to use it, taunting him lightly before creating another shockwave that forced Shuto to form another ice wall to stay within the boundaries. Shuto sent an ice attack back, which Izuku answered with continuous energy blasts that broke the ice, only for a fire attack to interrupt and send Shuto flying. Shuto summoned a protective ice barrier through the heat. Izuku cheered as he sent another energy blast. Shuto barely dodged before taking a hit that made him stumble. Izuku declared he would not give up and produced another shockwave. Shuto blocked it, causing ice fragments to scatter among the observers. Izuku quickly formed a shield to protect the audience. Shinszo used the opportunity to send a fire blast that struck Izuku, damaging his shirt and revealing his scars, which glistened with sweat and showed signs of injury. Present Mike made a light-hearted remark about the spectacle while the audience took in the sight. Izuku smirked at Shinszo and unleashed a continuous barrage of energy blasts, many of which Shinszo blocked. Izuku judged the situation as needing a distraction to get close. He dodged a fire attack and rushed in. Shinszo's ice shield was broken, and Izuku closed the distance and struck him in the gut. Shinszo stumbled back as fire flared from his body toward Izuku. Izuku formed a protective dome that enclosed Shinszo, and inside it Shinszo felt his strength waning. Izuku told Shinszo that his energy was amazing. Izuku giggled and said he felt bad having to absorb it, which made the other boy's eyes widen. Before he could react, Izuku shattered the shield and created a blast that sent the boy flying backward. As the boy was about to fall from the arena, he managed to create an ice wall and save himself. Izuku called out that he would try the same trick and formed an energy orb that fired blasts at Shinszo, surprising him. Something seemed to flicker over Izuku's head that only everyone but he noticed. He suddenly felt himself grow faster and stronger. In an instant he was in front of Shinszo. Shinszo set his left side alight with flame, but Izuku continued, surrounding his fists with energy and striking Shinszo in the gut, sending him flying. When Shinszo attempted to form another wall, Izuku rushed forward again and blasted it, shattering the barrier and knocking Shinszo out of the arena. The crowd fell silent. Debris and ice littered the ground. Izuku stood with much of his uniform torn and damaged, though he was still appropriately covered. His clothes had been badly wrecked by the impact. Shinszo lay unconscious. The spectators had witnessed a spectacular battle, a clash that felt like the arrival of a new generation of top heroes. The present heroes stared wide-eyed at the arena. Midnight whispered that the fighters were at pro level or beyond. Mike announced loudly that the winner was Izuku Yagi, and the crowd roared in agreement. Izuku smiled broadly as he took in the cheers. He felt supported in a way he had not expected. He rushed to Shinszo and immediately began stabilizing him, which drew a small, pained smile from the boy. Shinszo offered his congratulations, and Izuku responded that he was glad to have fought Todoroki-kun. Later, Izuku, Todoroki, and Bakugo, who continued to resist being restrained after refusing third place, were led to a room to wait before emerging on stage to receive first, second, and third medals. Ida had been expected to share the third step with Bakugo, but Izuku was told an emergency had prevented that. Midnight announced, with a laugh, that a special person would present the medals because the winners deserved recognition and praise. Izuku and the other top students emerged to renewed cheers. Izuku sighed, anticipating who would present the medals. Someone announced All Might, and the crowd erupted again as the number one hero leapt toward the students. All Might boomed his arrival. Izuku and Todoroki exchanged weary looks, with Todoroki giving a puzzled expression before forcing a small smile. When Todoroki turned to look at All Might, his gaze hardened and he looked ready to stand his ground if necessary. All Might praised Bakugo's display of strength and speed and declared him a deserving third-place finisher as he placed the bronze medal around the teen's neck. He then moved toward Izuku and stood in front of Todoroki. All Might complimented Todoroki as one of the strongest students he had encountered and suggested that Todoroki would have won if Izumo had not interfered. Todoroki nodded slightly after catching Izuku's glare, then stated that Izuku had defeated him because Izuku had been powerful. Even at his best, Todoroki believed Izuku would still have been the winner. Izuku smiled in response. All Might seemed taken aback for a moment but nodded and turned toward Izuku with the gold medal. The medal was suddenly snatched not by Izuku, but by a red feather twirling around him. A voice declared that the angel was his to congratulate. Eyes turned as the crowd erupted once more. A man descended with feathers flowing behind him. The man introduced himself, and Izuku stared as the gold escaped his iris. Izumo seemed to be connected to what had happened, a feeling that Izuku sensed throughout his body. Hawks extended his arm for Izuku to shake. Izuku introduced himself and locked hands with the hero. Hawks told Izuku that the medal belonged to him. The red feather hovered above Izuku's head and lowered the medal onto him. Izuku thought the hero might have winked at him before the crowd cheered again and Midnight resumed speaking. Midnight invited the new top contestant and student to give a winning speech. Izuku noticed Hawks still watching and gave a quick smile before stepping onto the stage and taking the microphone. He apologized for not being informed about his speech but explained that he had entered the festival with the goal of earning a place at UA High School. Winning felt rewarding, and having the medal placed on him by Hawks made it even more meaningful. He said he did not regret his choice to compete and felt honored to stand there despite the obstacles and opposition he had faced. The crowd cheered repeatedly. From the day of the sports festival, Izuku learned about the duality of people. Many began to notice him. Some approached him to ask about his life and how to improve themselves, especially those without quirks. Others regarded him differently, asking how he had gained a quirk after being considered quirkless or even labeling him a villain for his actions at USJ. It seemed as if no one heard him. The entire class was in chaos as everyone chatted and shared their opinions about the festival. The voices fell the moment Shota Aizawa entered the room. Aizawa informed the class that their homeroom would be on hero informatics. Some students panicked, worrying they might have a test. Aizawa then told them to choose code names that would stick with them throughout their hero careers. The cries of despair quickly shifted into screams of excitement. Aizawa explained that this had a lot to do with the Pro Hero draft picks and that, as first-year students, any offers could be taken back before graduation. He displayed the draft results showing which agencies had nominated specific students. Everyone stared wide-eyed at the differences in nominations. Kirishima pointed out the numbers, noting that Izuku had 4,536 nominations, Todoroki had 4,123, and Bakugo had 3. Many students seemed far ahead, while Izumo had received only a few. Izuku scolded Izumo for being reckless in combat, reminding him to stop taking unnecessary risks. Izumo scoffed and stuck his tongue out in response. Izuku simply smiled and watched his teacher. Aizawa announced that many students had not received offers and informed them that they would all spend a week interning with Pro Heroes. He emphasized that everyone would be interning, even those without specific heroes requesting them, and repeated that their chosen names were important. Midnight entered and announced that she would be approving the code names. She said the students would have time to think about their abilities and how they plan to use them, then present their names for her approval. She invited volunteers to come forward before she began choosing, and Aizawa drifted back to sleep. The classroom quieted and the students grew embarrassed. Izuku stayed quiet until an idea struck him. He raised his hand and Midnight smiled, encouraging him to come up. Izuku stood before the class holding his whiteboard. He opened his wings and turned the board toward everyone, first presenting a joking option and then settling on a more thoughtful choice. He revealed the name Helios and explained the reference to the Greek embodiment of the sun. Some students cheered at the unexpected choice. Midnight approved the example and suggested others use it as inspiration. Izuku returned to his seat and watched as classmates announced their picks, some impressive and others less so. By then, Aizawa had woken and was preparing to check their choices later, while Midnight stepped out of the classroom. He distributed papers listing possible hero agencies and told the students to take their time and present their decisions, mentioning he would be in the principal's office. The students began discussing which agencies they wanted to join, but Izuku drifted into thought. He noticed Todoroki looking uneasy and glanced at his paper to see Endeavor's hero agency listed among the options, eliciting a scoff from Izuku. Izumo mumbled that he planned to go to their grandfather's agency, arguing that their grandfather had experience dealing with One for All. Izuku nodded. He had not seen his grandfather in a long time and the thought of meeting him again was appealing, but he wanted to make the best choice for his abilities. When Izuku checked his own paper, he was surprised to find several top pro heroes offering him positions. Fat Gum, Fourth Kind, Indie Lady, Ryukyu, Kamui Woods, Mirko, Edge Shot, Best Genist, and Magneta. Above those names, however, was his favorite hero Hawks. Yaoyorozu commented that Hawks would be a great choice because his gear matched Izuku's abilities and because he had a charismatic presence. Izuku was a little surprised she had begun the conversation but agreed, noting that Hawks's proficiency in combat, rescue, and reconnaissance aligned with the ways Izuku's own abilities could be useful. Momo observed that Hawks had seemed friendly toward Izuku during the festival, which Izuku remembered. Izuku had confronted Izumo about the festival incident earlier. He had playfully accused Izumo of telling Hawks to hand him a medal, and Izumo had simply shrugged and refused to say. Back in the present, Izuku stared at Hawks's agency for a moment, then highlighted it. The idea of training there felt like it would be rewarding. The students boarded the bus and later headed to the train station to travel to their respective agencies. Aizawa reminded them to stay in touch and to use the internship to learn as much as possible. He explained that suits and quirks were only to be used when the pro they were staying with permitted it. Izuku sat between Yaoyorozu and Ida and expressed sympathy for Ida's loss, offering to be someone to talk to if needed. He had heard that Ida's brother had been injured fighting the hero killer Stain and felt awkward, assuming the family had already discussed it among themselves. Izuku offered to ask Hawks for permission to visit and help with the healing process. Ida was surprised and deeply grateful, and he thanked Izuku for his kindness. Izuku thought it was the least he could do. Izuku insisted that the hero was worth looking up to and that it would be selfish not to admire him. In a few minutes, the metro arrived at Kyushi, where Izuku would leave. Izumo told him to keep him updated as the two exchanged a hug. Izuku nodded and smiled at his brother and friends, waved, and stepped out. He spread his wings, intending to fly, then remembered Aizawa's rule about not using his power without permission. He sighed and walked instead. Within minutes he reached the building where the agency was located, headed to the top floor, and knocked on the door where Hawks would be waiting. Hawks opened the door and asked who was there and why Izuku was at the door. Izuku explained that he was there for the internship. Hawks teased about making a grand entrance through the window, pointing at an open window in the room. Izuku explained that he did not yet have a license to use his power and had not asked for permission to do so. Hawks reacted with an amused smirk and asked about permission as he opened the door wider to let him in. Once inside, Izuku said that because he was interning under Hawks, he needed permission to use his powers in certain ways. Hawks smirked, leaned on a chair, and told him that he had permission to use his powers as needed. Izuku responded awkwardly with a brief thanks. Hawks continued to grin in a way that made Izuku uneasy, but he tried to stay focused. Hawks then asked to see the uniform and said they were going on patrol. Izuku fumbled with his backpack strap and asked where he could change. Hawks indicated a nearby door and suggested he could change there. Izuku hesitated for a moment and then went inside to change. Once finished, he returned in his hero costume. Hawks reacted with visible surprise and said he was impressed at how the costume suited him. Izuku explained that he had aimed for a mythological appearance when choosing everything and mentioned he still needed visors for flight. Hawks offered an extra set of visors and went to fetch them. Izuku thanked him, took the visors and put them on. Hawks then told him to show what he could do as they headed to the window. Hawks invited Izuku to try to keep up, and Izuku admitted that in his current form he would need to conserve energy if he wanted to push himself. Hawks said they would start with basic exercises and observation. They would look around, check for criminals, and test Izuku's abilities. The two stepped out the window and took to the sky, flying side by side as they surveyed the city below. Izuku spotted a man using a quirk that made it appear he had a gun and threatening an older woman. He pointed this out to Hawks. Hawks asked what Izuku would do. Izuku raised his arm, formed an energy blast, and struck the man's hand, causing the man to flinch. The man began to threaten them again, but Izuku moved beside him to startle him, then created a shield in front of the older woman and himself. Izuku declared the man under arrest. The man fired several projectiles at Izuku, but the shield held firm. Izuku used the shield to push the man backward and subdue him, leaving him unconscious. The woman recognized Izuku as the student from UA. Hawks descended beside Izuku and noted his saving of a child earlier, praising his quick response and saying it had made a difference. Izuku thanked Hawks softly, and Hawks noticed that he seemed down and asked what was wrong. Izuku explained that he had been thinking about Ingenium, the brother of one of his classmates, who had been injured in an attack by Stain the hero killer, and that he wanted to visit and help him recover. Hawks asked where Ingenium was, and when Izuku answered that he was in Hosu, Hawks agreed to go there. Izuku brightened at the response. Izuku thanked Hawks, and Hawks replied that they should get some food and go rest. They headed toward a restaurant Hawks frequented. Hawks ordered chicken nuggets, which surprised Izuku, and Izuku ordered a bowl of soup. As they flew, Izuku wondered aloud if it felt strange to eat chicken. Hawks playfully asked if that was a bird joke, and Izuku smiled. When they arrived at a tall building Hawks had suggested, Izuku was struck by the view. Nearly every light in the city looked charming. They sat together and took in the panorama. Hawks asked if the soup would be enough, and Izuku explained that it was all he could eat because dealing with food felt odd, given how energy-based his powers were. Hawks reflected on Izuku's abilities and the hardships he had been through, and Izuku asked if his past would affect his career. Hawks reassured him that many heroes had difficult pasts and it would not prevent him from following a hero path. After a moment of quiet, Izuku asked why Hawks had offered him the internship. Hawks hesitated, then said he had noticed Izuku's potential, the halo that appeared at the sports festival and again when Izuku had lost control, and that he wanted to help him train and get to know him better as a mentee. Izuku nodded. Hawks then admitted, with some awkwardness, that he cared about being the one to support Izuku and see him grow. Izuku told Hawks not to worry about that and said Hawks was his favorite hero. Hawks brightened at the compliment and expressed a strong, protective fondness for Izuku. He quickly pulled back, explaining that he was concerned about the power imbalance between them and did not want to take advantage of the student-mentor relationship. Izuku offered a calm reassurance, and Hawks apologized for bringing up the subject. Izuku explained that he sensed intentions as an aura and felt no ill will from Hawks. Hawks sighed and said he felt bad for starting the conversation, and Izuku laughed softly and relaxed. Hawks promised that when he had the chance to explain more about things, he would do so and be there for Izuku. Izuku teased that he never expected Hawks to react so strongly and asked, half joking, whether everyone got the chance to be mentored by Hawks. Hawks confessed that his reaction felt unusual and that he could not fully explain it. They remained quiet for a while, simply enjoying the view. Hawks then asked about Izuku's powers, noting that they were confusing. Izuku described the wings that had appeared when he lost control, the halo that had shown up during the sports festival and other moments of stress, and his ability to manipulate energy, healing, blasts, and projectiles. He said the source of the energy felt strange. He could channel light to gain strength, but he could also draw energy from living beings. He mentioned that Izumo had told him he had used ice against Endeavor when he lost control, though he did not understand how that had happened. Hawks listened and nodded. Izuku offered a brief friendly gesture that surprised Hawks, and Hawks smiled, saying he felt he did not need to wait for an answer about being there for him. Later, while flying around the city, Hawks asked whether Izuku thought he could control his feathers the way Hawks did. Izuku said he had never tried. As they reached another building, Izuku suddenly froze, sensing something off inside. Hawks noticed and asked what was wrong. Izuku pointed to a nearby supermarket and said he felt bad intentions radiating from within, as if someone evil was inside. Hawks understood and motioned for them to check it out. They flew down and entered the building swiftly, attempting not to make a fuss. Hawks then asked if Izuku could track those bad intentions. Izuku nodded and continued walking. A few seconds later he stopped, his eyes dull as if he had seen a ghost. Izuku observed that it was a Nomu and that he could sense many souls within it, similar to what he had felt at the USA. The creature let out a strange screech, drawing disgusted looks from both heroes. A woman nearby was checking the aisle for cat food when the creature moved toward her. Izuku immediately stepped forward to shield her, but then noticed the woman levitating away. Izuku realized that Hawks was using one of his feathers to keep her safe. Hawks ordered everyone to clear the area, and the crowd scattered in fear. The creature shrieked and struck Izuku's shield, shattering it and sending him tumbling backward. Izuku noted that this Nomu was not as strong as the one at USJ. Hawks launched a flurry of feathers at the creature, but it blew them aside, creating a shockwave of wind. Hawks pointed out a vulnerable spot near the creature's head and produced a hardened feather to use as a blade. He dashed in, dodged a punch, spun, and attempted to strike, but Izuku intervened. Izuku shouted that they could not kill them. Hawks replied that his intention was not to kill. He explained that these beings were creations, forced together from multiple quirks and acting like mindless slaves. Izuku insisted they were still souls, raising his voice and startling Hawks. The creature lashed out and struck Izuku, pushing him back, but Izuku only scoffed. He surged forward, knocking the creature back and driving a blade of energy into its side, leaving a shallow scratch. The creature emitted a pained cry as a brief flare of light appeared in its eyes, catching Hawks off guard. Hawks paused and admitted he had a risky idea. He asked Izuku if he could absorb energy, and Izuku confirmed that he could. As the creature continued to attack, Hawks suggested that Izuku try drawing its energy out. Izuku formed a protective shield around himself and advanced. The creature shrieked again as its energy began to be pulled away, and it collapsed. For several minutes the effort continued, and Izuku fell to his knees, feeling as if every cell in his body burned with strain. Hawks attempted to speak, but Izuku cried out as the scars on his body began to glow and a halo appeared above his head. Izuku declared that he would purify the creature, his voice taking on an otherworldly resonance as if many voices spoke through him. Energy burst from the shield and struck the Nomu, which let out a final cry before energy swirled around it and then subsided. The halo faded, the glow in Izuku's scars dimmed, and he collapsed into unconsciousness. Hawks caught him, his expression wild as he looked at the boy who now appeared uninjured and normal as if nothing had happened. Hawks questioned whether the other boy might have been the Nomu, but received no response as the boy lay passed out on the ground. Hawks had expected the energy to be drained to weaken the creature, not the complete purification that had just occurred. The woman from earlier rushed back to the door and asked if both heroes were all right. Hawks reassured her that everything was under control and smiled, slipping back into his public persona. The woman explained that a strange light symbol had appeared above the building, which had frightened everyone. Hawks maintained that they had handled the situation and then carried the two unconscious boys out, handing the former creature to the police before returning to his agency. At the agency, Hawks laid Izuku on a bed and watched him sleep. He wondered quietly what Izuku truly was. The HPSC would almost certainly want answers, so Hawks prepared himself, but rest was interrupted by an urgent summons to the HPSC. At the meeting, Hawks was told that the intern training under him was dangerous and unusually powerful. Hawks replied that he was aware and that the intern had stood up to the top pro heroes. More pressingly, officials showed footage of a light symbol that had appeared above the Kyushu General Market during the battle, a large circle containing 4 interlinked crosses with a small sun symbol similar to the one on the teen's necklace. The HPSC officials made clear that they expected Hawks to ensure the boy remained aligned with their side, and Hawks nodded in agreement. When Hawks returned to his agency, Izuku had already regained consciousness. Izuku asked weakly whether he had hurt anyone. Hawks explained that he had saved the former Nomu and that the halo had appeared to purify it, which left Izuku surprised at his own ability. He mentioned feeling as if his body had been on fire during the process. Hawks sat beside him and told Izuku that he had done great. Hawks noted that the woman might have died if Izuku had not sensed the danger and intervened, and he credited Izuku with preventing many casualties. Izuku modestly said that Hawks deserved thanks for saving the woman, admitting that he had not done much. A short, quiet moment followed as both considered what had happened and what it might mean for the future. Izuku said that his feathers had done it. Hawks shook his head, pointed at Izuku's wings, and insisted that it had been his feathers, addressing him as Angel. Dealing with the amount of energy he consumed was difficult. Izuku had slept through the entire night, ignoring the missed calls and messages. He had wanted to patrol with Hawks again, but Hawks had insisted he needed rest. The next morning Izuku rolled on the couch for a few seconds before getting up. When he checked his phone he found 3 missed calls and a string of messages from his brother. Izumo had sent impatient messages asking where he was, teasing him about being unreachable despite wanting Hawks, and asking why he could not answer his older brother. Izumo then described his progress with OFA, explaining that he had started spreading the quirk through his body in small percentages to gain more reliable speed and that he was calling the technique full cowling. Izuku smirked at that. Nothing wrong with borrowing a twin's idea, he thought. Experimenting with spreading energy proved more complicated than Izuku expected. His halo flared and he collapsed, barely able to move. Hawks, still sleepy, pointed out that it was barely 8 and suggested he try using less energy. Izuku nodded and slowed his output. The light of his halo and the glow of his scars dimmed. Hawks informed him that they were heading to Hosu that day and told him to be prepared, calling him Angel again. Izuku grinned and hurried to get dressed, wishing his hero costume had visors but hoping his current gear would suffice. He wondered how Hawks dressed so quickly. Hawks teased him about not showing his halo and lamented that he would have liked to watch it. Izuku explained that he probably could not stay in that state for long and preferred to conserve it for when he really needed it. Hawks accepted that with an amused smirk. The two took off and flew toward the hospital where Ida's brother was staying. Along the way, Izuku repeatedly sensed hostile presences and they made several stops to ensure civilians were safe. By the time they reached the hospital, it was already noon. Izuku apologized, but Hawks waved it off, saying they had stopped dozens of criminals and that the time had not been wasted. They entered the quiet hospital room where Tensei lay staring into space. Izuku greeted him, which startled the man. Tensei managed to recognize Hawks and the festival winner and spoke weakly. Izuku introduced himself as Helios and explained that he was Ida's friend. He reached out and placed a hand on Tensei's head while Hawks watched with some curiosity. Energy gathered around Tensei's body as Izuku worked, easing many of the injuries. Izuku explained that he could not restore Tensei's ability to walk yet. The nerves and spine had been severely damaged and the recovery would take time, but he had done as much as he could for the moment. Tensei sighed, teared up, and nodded in gratitude. He thanked Helios, and Izuku said he was glad Hawks had allowed them to come. Tensei replied that it was a hero's job to help others, said with a bit of theatricality that made the other two chuckle. After a few minutes, Hawks excused them and they left. While flying back, Hawks's stomach growled and he suggested stopping at a restaurant. Izuku agreed, feeling tired. While waiting in line to order, Izuku saw an emergency call from Izumo and panicked. He wanted to rush to his brother, but Hawks was surrounded by fans and distracted. Izuku apologized briefly, flicked his wings, and took off. Energy gathered around him as he entered his halo state and sped away, leaving a small shockwave that sent loose debris fluttering and caused minor damage to nearby storefronts. He followed the location on his phone. As he neared the area, his halo began to fade and his body ached. A dangerous aura made him tremble. He steadied himself, flicked his wings, and pushed on. When he reached the source, he found Izumo, Ida, and another hero lying on the ground, clearly injured and unresponsive. A figure stood over them, taunting them and calling them fakes while raising a blade as if to strike Izumo. Just as the attacker was about to move, a sudden blast knocked him back. Izuku warned Stain not to touch his brother as he rushed forward with an energy sword. Stain scoffed and met him, their blades clashing as they pressed against one another. Stain produced a dagger with his free hand, but the weapon was knocked back into a wall by a move from Izumo, who was lying on the ground. Izumo warned that if Stain struck his brother, the consequences could be severe, and Izuku's eyes widened as Stain raised another dagger and swung it at him. Izuku barely dodged, jumping back and sending a burst of energy towards Stain, but the villain evaded. Stain taunted that Izuku was weak and no true successor to All Might. Anger flared in Izuku, his eyes glowed and a halo of light formed once more. He shouted his defiance and summoned a large orb of energy above his head. Stain hesitated for a moment, then lunged at Izuku. Izuku held the orb and unleashed a massive blast that sent Stain crashing into a wall and demolished part of it. Izumo shouted for Izuku to stop as more energy swirled around the boy, causing him to wince and strain. Izuku muttered his bitterness about All Might before collapsing, muscles tensing and his face paling. Izumo pushed through the effects of Stain's ability as it began to weaken after the blast and rushed to check on his brother. Izuku was physically uninjured but looked exhausted and weak. Before Izumo could reach him, a winged Nomu grabbed Izumo and carried him away. The creature was wounded when someone stabbed its hand and it released its grip. Izumo began to levitate instead of falling. Hawks arrived, levitating beside Izumo and indicating Izuku as the one who had intervened. Izumo responded with a small, wry smile that suggested a private joke. Hawks then descended and caught Izuku, steadying him while Izumo floated down behind them with the aid of Hawks's feather. Once on the ground, Hawks checked on Izuku and expressed relief that he had saved people from Stain's rampage. Gran Torino arrived and scolded Izumo for leaving without permission, forcing Izumo to scramble to explain. The situation was chaotic and confusing for everyone involved. Izuku disliked waking in the hospital, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and lingering smells. Hawks told him that he had some explaining to do, and Izuku reacted with an awkward, nervous smile. He apologized, looking embarrassed, but Hawks reassured him that there was nothing to be sorry for and praised him for saving lives. Hawks expressed a straightforward, professional concern and gratitude for Izuku's actions. Izumo, from his own bed a few meters away, asked them to stop making a scene since he had only just woken up. Izuku flinched, bumped Hawks by accident, and then hurried over to be near his brother. He asked if Izumo was okay and received a reassuring nod and a small, gentle smile. Hawks explained that media reports had named Gran Torino and himself as the ones who stopped Stain so that Izuku would not face unnecessary trouble. Izuku accepted the explanation with a small smile. Hawks apologized for being dragged into the attention and expressed concern for Izuku's well-being in a calm, respectful manner. The three of them exchanged light teasing and comments. Izumo complained that the two were being insufferable, and Izuku playfully responded as they continued to recover. Hawks made an amused observation about how Izumo had been defensive toward Izuku for some time, recalling the sports festival. Izumo protested theatrically that he was not defensive, and the mood remained playful rather than romantic or NTMT. The door then swung open and Izuku's mother, Inko, rushed in and embraced her son, scolding him in a relieved, emotional way. All Might followed behind her, showing his support. The hospital room filled with the reassuring presence of family and fellow heroes as they began to sort out the aftermath of the encounter with Stain. All Might greeted them with his usual broad smile, and Hawks felt his shock show as he stared at the two heroes. He could hardly believe that these could be the parents of his angel. Hawks explained to All Might that he had been waiting for his student to wake so they could finally leave. He put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Izuku's irritation was obvious to everyone, and Hawks did not want to deal with an out-of-control Izuku in front of the hero community. All Might observed that the boy could be reckless. Hawks was about to answer when Izuku gripped his arm and said he would be leaving. Hawks waved a farewell to All Might before following Izuku out, and Izuku called back for Hawks to text him, which Hawks acknowledged. As they stepped outside, Izuku asked whether he was even allowed to leave. Hawks promised to sort it out but told Izuku he would owe some explanations. They walked to the reception, where Hawks spoke with the woman for a few minutes before they set off. They took to the sky and flew away. A tense silence fell over the trip, which Izuku resented. After a few minutes, they landed on a rooftop. Hawks could not hide his incredulity when he realized who Izuku's parents were. He asked, in disbelief, if Izuku's father was All Might and his mother Magnetica. Izuku apologized quietly, surprising Hawks. Hawks surged forward and gripped Izuku's shoulders, demanding to know why Izuku would apologize. He could not believe it either. Hawks repeated his disbelief that the number one hero, the person everyone admired, could be the source of such abuse and neglect. Izuku only nodded slowly. Hawks took a breath and then drew the teen into a supportive hug. He told Izuku that he was strong and that many would be unable to keep going after discovering a neglectful or abusive parent in the public eye. Izuku returned the hug and affirmed quietly that he intended to be pure and good, and to become a real hero who would show people like Stain that All Might was not the true measure of heroism. He resolved to surpass what had come before. They remained like that for a few moments before Izuku broke the embrace and asked about Stain. Hawks explained that Stain had been unable to stop Izuku's attack and had suffered many injuries, but that he had been taken to Tartarus rather than killed. Izuku showed a deeper sadness at the news and admitted that he hated losing control and hurting others. Hawks put a hand on his shoulder and let Izuku rest his head there, offering quiet comfort. Minutes passed in companionable silence. Eventually, Izuku asked what they were to one another, a question that made Hawks tense and then sigh. Izuku struggled to find the right words, describing how close they had become and how confusing that closeness felt. Hawks admitted that he did not have an answer, that Izuku made him act in ways he had been trained not to, though Hawks immediately regretted how that sounded. When Izuku pressed for more about that training, Hawks hesitated, then finally revealed his true name. He identified himself as Kigo Takami. The confession stunned Izuku, who found it hard to reconcile Hawks with the possibility of being related to a villain, to having been neglected or controlled by the hero administration. He wondered aloud how Hawks could have endured so much without breaking. Hawks pointed out that he was technically 18, but Izuku protested emotionally, clinging to him and asking why so many parents behaved so horribly. Hawks answered with tired honesty that he did not know. The two of them sat with their confusion and fatigue, neither of them having clear answers. After an hour, Izuku stirred and mumbled something about a promise they had made earlier. Hawks smiled and stood, offering his hand to help Izuku up. Instead of anything romantic, Hawks fulfilled the promise by offering a gentle, affectionate gesture appropriate to their closeness as mentor and friend. They opened their wings and took to the sky together, Ichika following Hawks' lead as they flew in tandem. They soared for a while until they reached a forest. Izuku remarked on how pretty it was, and Hawks reassured him that it was okay to feel whatever he needed to feel. They glided over the treetops, sharing a quiet moment of calm before the next part of their journey. Hawks nodded as he stared upward, noting that it was not what he had come for. Izuku followed his gaze and saw the moon full and bright above them. Hawks complimented Izuku on how he seemed to stand out beneath the moonlight, and the two lingered close in companionable silence. A quiet moment passed between them, and then something unexpected happened. A sudden surge of light and energy wrapped around both of them. The phenomenon lasted for a few minutes, pushing them together until the energy dispersed and they stepped apart, surprisingly unharmed. Both were puzzled when a matching necklace appeared on each of their necks. Hawks wondered aloud how the necklaces had formed and how the one had appeared on his own throat. Izuku could only shrug. He had no explanation, and he regretted that the moment had been interrupted. Hawks noticed Izuku's disappointment and reassured him that there would be time for more moments like this before the internship ended. Izuku brightened at that reassurance, and Hawks promised to look out for him during the remaining days of the placement. They kept that understanding private. The rest of the internship passed with Hawks supporting Izuku as best he could within the rules. Izuku knew he would have to return to his class at UA, and when Hawks asked if he might be allowed to keep Izuku on after the internship, Izuku laughed and explained that as a first year he would not be permitted to transfer. Hawks teased that Izuku was not just any first year and that others already thought he was special. Izuku smiled and accepted the praise. Returning from their internships felt odd for all of the students, but none of them felt it as deeply as Izuku. He could not tell anyone, not even Izumo, about the strange occurrence with Hawks. They agreed together to keep the incident to themselves so there would be no trouble with the hero administration. In class, the students compared notes about their internships, trading the same stories they had been repeating since returning. The most talked about adventure, however, remained the confrontation with Stain, where Izuku, Izumo, and Ida had fought together. Ida thanked Izuku repeatedly for helping him and for aiding in his brother's recovery, and Izuku kept insisting that it had been teamwork. Training continued despite the return to school. All Might gathered Class 1A at Training Ground Gamma to explain the next exercise. He described the area as full of buildings, factories, and winding pathways that would limit movement and force teams to think strategically. He said that each group of 5 would start in different locations and that he would act as the victim, calling out for help. The first team to find him would win. He also reminded them to keep property damage to a minimum, casting a pointed look at Izuku. Izuku bristled and explained that he only lost control when pushed beyond his limits. He began to levitate a little as his wings stirred, waiting for his teammates to be chosen. His group was eventually formed with Ojiro, Ida, Mina, and Siro, not the matchup he had privately hoped for, but capable teammates nonetheless. Mina cheerfully told Izuku that they had trained hard since the sports festival and asked him not to underestimate them. Izuku smiled and promised he would not. All Might then signaled the start of the exercise, and the class readied themselves for the race rescue training. All Might announced that the competition had begun as he pressed a button that let out a loud horn sound. The students surged forward, each using their quirks to boost themselves, while Izuku remained still. He drew a steady breath as energy gathered around him. And a faint halo appeared. Izumo's comment was cut off when Izuku launched skyward, creating a shockwave that cracked the stage. He streaked forward, leaving a shimmering trail of energy as wings flapped fiercely behind him. Guided by his senses, Izuku found All Might. From above he dove, producing another shockwave that buckled the ground and sent All Might stumbling backward. Bakugo's reaction was cut short as the auditorium erupted in cheers for Izuku. All Might warned that such a shockwave could have injured bystanders, and Izuku explained that it had been for show and that he would have descended carefully in a real rescue. All Might scoffed and then declared Izuku the winner of the first round. The remaining races continued. Izumo won his heat, and Shudo and Bakugo put up a fierce fight before Bakugo narrowly took the victory. After the events, the students hurried to the changing rooms to shed their costumes. Ida observed that Izuku had improved a great deal under Hawks' guidance. Izuku accepted the compliment awkwardly and admitted that Hawks had been a good teacher, his cheeks coloring. Bakugo's impatient scoff sounded familiar in the background. Izuku's phone buzzed and he smiled at a playful message from Hawks, who teased him gently and signed off saying he had to go to class. Izuku replied in kind before tucking the phone away. Most students filtered out, leaving Izuku and Bakugo alone by the lockers. Bakugo accused Izuku of lying and glared at him. Izuku returned the taunt by calling Bakugo a bully and smiled in a way that provoked him. Bakugo shoved Izuku against a locker and berated him, claiming Izuku had always been weaker and accusing him of getting above himself after gaining a quirk. Izuku demanded that Bakugo let him go, his eyes glowing with golden energy. Bakugo shouted in fury and an explosive blast struck near him, forcing Bakugo back. Izuku asked what Bakugo wanted from him, reminding him that Bakugo had spent years telling him to leave him alone, and questioning why he continued to pick at him now. Energy spiraled around Izuku as his anger broke through. Taken aback, Bakugo stepped away, fingers sparking with the promise of more explosions. Izuku warned that he would not hesitate to defend himself if Bakugo advanced further. Bakugo erupted with accusations about a broken promise and raged that Izuku had gone and started getting close to someone else. He charged, but Izuku dodged an explosion and responded with a controlled blast that battered the nearby wall. Izuku stepped into the hallway and raised a defensive barrier. Bakugo barreled through with a powerful explosion that cracked plaster and sent debris scattering. Izuku held firm behind his shield. He thought bitterly of Bakugo's past cruelty and how those words had wounded him deeply. Reminding Bakugo of that history, Izuku advanced and struck, sending Bakugo tumbling through a window. Bakugo triggered explosions to slow his fall, and Izuku prepared to pursue. Before the confrontation could continue, a capture weapon struck Bakugo. Izuku evaded it and looked up at Aizawa, who had arrived and demanded an immediate explanation. Izuku scoffed and fixed Bakugo with a hard stare, making it clear that Bakugo had broken their bond and that forgiveness would not come easily. Later, Nizu addressed Bakugo with a stern expression, explaining that the investigation had found that Bakugo had bullied Izuku and encouraged others to do the same, which had led to a dangerous incident. Nizu added that the situation had escalated to the point where Izuku's sudden quirk activation had prevented a much worse outcome, and that, were it not for that activation, the consequences could have been severe. He told Bakugo that his actions could lead to expulsion and possible legal consequences. Around them, the pro-heroes stood in silence, watching the scene unfold. When Nizu was angry, no one stepped between him and the person he addressed. Nizu explained that Izuku had made it clear he did not want the other student to receive punishment. That statement shocked everyone in the room except Izuku, who looked away. Nizu added that Izuku had also said he would rather never deal with his tormentor again unless a teacher required it for training, and he spoke sharply about the need to make expectations clear. Niza declared that the boy was no longer allowed to speak to or attack Izuku Yagi unless a teacher specifically instructed interaction during training, and that severe consequences would follow if he disobeyed. Bakugo nodded slightly. Niza then dismissed them to class and warned that their parents would be informed about both past actions and the recent incident that had nearly devastated a school floor and endangered many students. Bakugo seemed ready to argue, but the glares in the room quieted him. He stood, nodded, and left. Izuku bowed to apologize to Nizu, and Nizu told him to work on his reflexes and control, noting that his power was impressive but destructive and could not be allowed to run unchecked. Izuku sighed, nodded, and excused himself, shooting a glare toward All Might, who had watched the whole exchange. The following days were awkward. Izuku and Bakugo stopped speaking and avoided their usual barbs, and the rest of the students kept their distance. Hawks privately told Izuku he would have been willing to teach Bakugo a lesson about respect, but Izuku declined the offer. Aizawa addressed the class and reminded them there was a week left before finals. He emphasized that studying alone was not enough and that they needed to train as well, since the practical exam carried as much weight as the written portion. He left the class with a terse expectation for good marks, and the students immediately panicked. Izuku volunteered to host study sessions. Kaminari and Mina enthusiastically confirmed they would join, and other students gathered around him. Momo expressed concern that Izuku needed to work on his own abilities to avoid losing control, and Izuku replied that they could study together and then train together so everyone could grow stronger and be ready for summer training camp. Ida raised his hand to offer support, and Jairu said she would join both study and training. Kirishima raised his hand, but Bakugo shoved him aside in a rough, aggressive manner and insisted he would be the one to tutor him. The other students flooded Izuku with questions and plans. Izuku said he could not host everyone at his place and, as class representative, would ask Principal Nizu for permission to use one of the training grounds first. If more space or different facilities were needed, they would arrange that. Momo offered her house as a venue for the study sessions, and the group agreed on the plan before heading to the cafeteria. At lunch, the students continued to worry about the practical exam. Izuku suggested that it probably would not be extremely difficult given it was the first term and many classes had felt manageable, though Ida argued that some assignments had been easier only because of individual strengths. Uraraka praised Izuku and pointed out that Todoroki and Bakugo were the only students who approached his level, which made Izuku blush. Izuku felt a collision from behind and retracted a wing to block it. Monoma had bumped into him with a food tray and responded with a mocking comment, implying the others were attention-seeking. The twins and Ida ignored the insult, and the cafeteria grew tense. Monoma continued by derisively asking where they were when danger had struck, suggesting they were chasing attention. That finally provoked Izuku. He stood, spread his wings, and his friends rose as well, wary that he might lose control. Izuku stepped forward to confront Monoma, explaining that he had rushed to help because people had been in danger and that he had defended them while the heroes were occupied handling the Nomu threat. He demanded to know where Monoma had been when that happened and why he was so quick to seek notoriety instead of helping. A short silence followed as the students waited for Monoma's response. Izuku answered, then Monoma drew a deep breath before Izuku calmed down and returned to his seat. Izuku hidden his wings and sat, telling the others that someone who craved attention so much lacked self-love. With that, everyone went back to their meals, none willing to mention what had happened. Bird asked Angel if she was okay, and Angel replied that she was fine, only that some man had been rude and she had dealt with him. Bird observed that he had been talking about Stain and accusing Angel of seeking attention. Angel asked how Bird knew. Bird explained that the necklace, the one that had appeared when they first kissed, had suddenly started glowing, though no one else seemed to notice, and it began replaying the conversation Angel had with the man. When Bird had asked a fan if she had heard anything, the fan had said no. Angel asked whether this had happened before, and Bird said it had also happened during Angel's fight with Bakugo. Angel concluded that the necklace might send Bird glimpses of her situations when she was angry, and Bird agreed they would have to test that theory. Angel reminded Bird that finals were coming up and asked if Bird could visit during summer training camp. Bird promised to try and said he missed Angel. Angel teased Bird about using old-fashioned emojis, And Bird laughed it off before saying he had to go. Angel said goodbye. The teen slipped his phone away and sighed while chatting with friends, then noticed Izumo staring at him with a questioning smirk. He rolled his eyes and looked away. He did not have time to deal with his brother's mischief. Training with the entire class was hectic. Everyone was painfully enthusiastic, energetic, and loud. Izuku appreciated the energy but still found it overwhelming. Todoroki did not join the group that day, training with his father and studying alone. Izuku led the class through basic hand-to-hand combat and helped each student choose weapons suited to their fighting styles, advising them to consider adding those tools to their hero suits in future upgrades. The practical sessions were intense but productive. Study sessions were quieter, though not perfect. Most students with strong marks studied independently, while others sought help for specific questions before continuing on their own. The 3 days of written exams passed, and many students celebrated, some with cheers and happy tears as they thanked one another and Izuku, who smiled warmly at their gratitude. Mina told her friends that she thought Izuku was an amazing friend and a bright soul, though scary when he snapped. Jiru said he had mentioned wanting music sessions to learn more about musical tools, and that Izuku seemed fascinating. Momo added that Izuku was also very smart in combat, and she felt she had learned more from him in the past week than in years when it came to battle confidence. Izuku, seated on the boys' side of the changing room, caught glimpses of their conversation but did not bring it up. He did not want to seem like he had been eavesdropping. A day after the written exams, the students gathered in the central plaza with the teachers and Nizu standing before them. Everyone talked about prior exams being against robots, according to upperclassmen, but the mood shifted when Nizu announced a change. Nizu explained that this year's test would be different. It would involve hero work with teamwork and combat against actual people, and students would be paired in teams of 2 to face one of the teachers. He said that partners and opponents had been chosen using factors like fighting styles, grades, and personal relationships. Aizawa began listing the matchups. He stated that Yaoyorozu and Todoroki would be paired against him. Izumo quietly told his brother that their father had informed him they would be paired together, and Izumo added that their father had told him they would be matched against him. Izuku acknowledged this with a sigh. He had to be unlucky enough to get that assignment. As Aizawa continued, All Might unexpectedly descended in front of the assembly, startling everyone. Momo protested that it was impossible to pit a student against the symbol of peace, but Nizu replied that the students selected for that match had powers he believed placed them on comparable footing. Ida began to speak but was cut off when Izuku spread his wings and asked if he was allowed to go all out. Nizu answered with a small, knowing smile and gave permission, which sent a ripple of apprehension through the crowd. Izuku simply nodded and told Izumo they could do this. Izumo said he would provide support from a distance and that Izuku would know when to step in. Izuku promised he would keep Izumo from being hurt. Aizawa resumed the announcements while Izuku and Izumo began to prepare. Their team was 10th, giving them time to get ready. Nizu added that, to make the competition fair considering teachers' greater physical ability, the teachers would wear compressed weights that effectively added half their body weight to limit their stamina somewhat. Izuku scoffed at the idea and glared at All Might. Izumo, smirking, declared they needed no handicaps to defeat him. All Might returned the smirk and accepted the notion of a challenge. Izuku rolled his eyes and walked away. Their options were to defeat All Might or flee while he pursued them, and running was not a real choice. He wanted to take the man down and prove himself. Izuku headed to the watching room to observe the exams, accompanied by Izumo and Ururika. Their teammate Aoyama was otherwise occupied and unable to plan with them. Izuku described the problems their friends had faced and discussed how he and Izumo might challenge All Might. Kirishima and Sato were taken down in minutes. Tsu and Tokoyami defeated ectoplasm by using clever tricks. Tokoyami ran distractions while Tsu swallowed HNDCFFS to restrain the hero. The rest of the exams continued with most students passing. Only Kaminari and Mino were stalled out by Nizu until time expired. After hours, it was the twins' turn. They entered the mock city for the final exam and focused on the pro-hero waiting for them. Mike, who had been beaten earlier by his students, resumed his role as announcer and declared that the final battle would be the twins against All Might. He counted down from 3, and the match began. Instead of immediately moving, the two teens stood motionless. Izuku activated True Angel mode. The surrounding buildings suddenly lay in ruins. Dust and rubble replaced what had been standing structures. Energy gathered around Izuku and a glowing halo appeared above him. All Might noted the boy's speed and lunged to strike, but Izuku reacted and blocked, producing a shockwave that sent Izumo skidding backward and left part of the terrain. Shattered while spectral wings manifested around the twins. All Might tried to follow with a headbutt. Izuku created a defensive barrier to stop it. All Might remarked on the strength he still faced, but Izuku replied that he had an advantage. He used his wings to boost power and sent the hero flying. Izuku then closed in, his fists charged with energy. He struck All Might and sent him crashing through more of the fake city. The commentators and spectators watched in stunned silence. Aizawa's expression shifted into an unexpected smirk as the exchange continued. Izuku and Izumo executed a plan. Izuku would absorb and block attacks while Izumo landed startling blows with shared power. Izumo's hit gave Izuku the opening to ascend quickly. Energy began forming above him into a concentrated orb. All Might leaped to intercept but was repelled by a golden shield Izuku produced. Izumo announced that the earlier destruction had been intentional. The rubble Izuku had displaced began to levitate. Izumo directed it forward as an assault. All Might tried to push through the debris, but he misjudged the situation. Izuku raised the energy orb higher and his wings expanded dramatically. All Might realized too late what was coming, and a massive energy blast radiated outward across the training area. The blast sent students and teachers stumbling back and caused extensive damage to the mock city, cracking the ground and shattering much of the surrounding glass. Mike reacted in disbelief as dust filled the air. When the smoke cleared, All Might emerged badly injured and visibly weakened, his costume torn. Izuku and Izumo closed in. Izumo struck and Izuku followed with another forceful blast that sent the hero into a weakened state. All Might reverted to his less powerful form and slumped. Izuku, his halo fading and his complexion drained from exhaustion, murmured that they had won as he began to lose consciousness. Izumo panicked briefly while they fell, then entered full control, catching Izuku and redirecting their descent so they landed with force that further damaged the area. All Might struggled to rise but was restrained when Izumo used the HNDCFFS provided for the exam, and the officials declared the twins the winners. Teachers and students watched in shocked silence. Aizawa remarked on the astonishing result. Before anyone could move toward the ruined mock city, a figure swooped in and claimed Izuku. Izumo scoffed at the interruption, then handed his brother over to the newcomer with a resigned sigh. Hawks hovered with his wings and took Izuku into his arms, carrying him back toward the assembled teachers and students. Hawks noted that his student had performed impressively. Nizu reminded Hawks that Izuku had mentioned the possibility of a visit but had not mentioned the extent of what had occurred. Hawks explained that the form Izuku had used was True Angel mode. In that state the boy accessed his full powers for a limited time of 6 minutes. Added that the mode could be used only once per week because it drained him heavily. If he exceeded the safe duration, his body would suffer severe strain and risk serious physical harm. Recovery Girl observed that Izuku's body presently appeared to be stabilizing. Hawks advised giving Izuku 6 hours to recover an hour for every minute he had remained in that state. Nizu reflected on the price of such power. Hawks silently twirled a strand of Izuku's hair between his fingers and noted that they had learned about the mode during Izuku's internship. Hawks noted that he was able to remain in it for 5 minutes initially. The others nodded or stayed still, unsure how to react. Mike praised the young listener as a great student with incomparable potential, and Aizawa admitted that he was one of his strongest students, emphasizing the possessive pride. Hawks looked down wide-eyed. It remained unspoken that he did not think of Izuku only as a student. Most of the students were ecstatic with their exam results. When Izuku returned the following day refreshed and energetic, he noticed how most of the class beamed with happiness over passing. Only 4 students did not seem pleased: Mina, Kaminari, Kirishima, and Sato, who had failed the practical test. Aizawa announced that some had failed the finals, and the 4 groaned in disappointment. He then declared that everyone was going to the training camp, and when the four cheered, he activated his quirk briefly to bring them back down, warning that the camp would push them to their limits. Failure would be punished with extra, tougher lessons. No one answered, they were too intimidated. After the announcement, the class erupted in excited chatter about the camp. Hahakor suggested they all go shopping together, and most agreed, but Izuku could not. He had promised Hawks he would go out with him. Todoroki mentioned visiting his mother on free days, and Izuku explained that he had training with Hawks. The friends tried to persuade them to change their plans, Mina and Kirishima urging him to treat himself, but Izuku declined, saying he had promised Hawks and that today was the best day for training. His eyes held sadness. Most of the group left with sighs of defeat, but Izumo asked Izuku to invite Hawks along because he wanted to hang out with him. Izuku hesitated but agreed to ask, patting his brother's shoulder, which brightened Izumo's face. Izuku pulled out his phone and texted Hawks a casual greeting. Hawks replied with concern, asking if something was wrong or if Izuku had fallen ill. Izuku explained that the class planned to go to the mall, and he did not want to cancel his plans with Hawks, but his brother had asked him to invite Hawks because he wanted to join. Hawks noticed that Izuku's communication device, his necklace, was activating and reassured him that they could go to the mall. Relieved, Izuku agreed and thanked Hawks, saying he would see him soon. Izuku hurried to change into casual clothes and flew toward the mall. He met Hawks there. Hawks greeted him with a warm smile. Izuku returned the smile, slightly embarrassed, and the two exchanged pleasant, friendly words. Hawks teased him about nicknames in a light, private way, and Izuku blushed before nodding. They checked that they were away from crowds and press before heading into the mall. The students of Class 1A stared as the pair arrived. Shiro asked if anyone had kept in touch with their internship heroes. Izuku and Hawks acknowledged the group, waving, and then the students swarmed them with chatter about what to buy. Izumo suggested they all spread out and meet back in an hour or two, and the students scattered, leaving Izuku and Hawks alone. Izuku remarked that everyone seemed eager to hang out, and Hawks observed that it meant more free time for the two of them. Izuku smiled and followed Hawks as he browsed clothing, offering opinions when asked. Izuku did not buy anything himself. Instead, he enjoyed keeping Hawks company and chatting. When they sat down in a relatively empty spot to avoid attention, Izuku explained that he had to be financially responsible and therefore did not need anything. Hawks looked surprised, then asked where Izuku was staying. Hawks asked how Izuku was getting money. Izuku answered with a shrug that he had been staying in abandoned houses he found around the country. Hawks pressed about water, electricity, and money, and Izuku explained that the house he stayed in had utilities, and he picked up small jobs around the neighborhood. He added that he did not need much in the way of food and water, since his energy was what kept him going. Hawks shook his head and insisted that Izuku come live with him after the case was finished, mentioning that his place had extra rooms. Izuku protested, worried about the HPSC and the complications of living together when they did not even fully understand what they were. Hawks brushed off those concerns, saying he would explain Izuku's situation as wanting to keep an eye on him and ensure he remained in control. He then tightened his hold on Izuku's hands and told Izuku that he had been thinking a lot about his well-being and wanted to help more than he had let on. Hawks offered Izuku a stable place to stay and promised to support him. Izuku, still hesitant and embarrassed, accepted the offer with a quiet nod. They talked for a while after that, Izuku rambling as Hawks listened and nodded. Minutes later, an alarm announced that a member of the League of Villains was inside the mall. Both of them rushed to the ground floor where the police had reported the intruder. Hawks suggested that Izuku's focus might have been elsewhere when he missed sensing the intruder, teasing him lightly and making Izuku blush. At the police line, they were surprised to find Izumo, and it became clear that both twins had explanations to offer. Living with Hawks was a new experience for Izuku. The man was always busy, which made sense for a top pro hero, but Izuku did not realize how demanding his schedule was until they shared a roof. Hawks would wake early, rarely eat much breakfast, pick up reports and missions from the HPSC, then travel between cities handling missions and submitting reports late into the night before returning to sleep for only a few hours. The idea of creating a society where heroes had more free time gradually made sense to Izuku as he observed Hawk's routine. Izuku was reserved and careful, preferring to attend to small details and keep to himself. Hawks respected that, but he also made it clear he wanted to be there to help and support Izuku in practical ways. When Hawks offered minor help around the apartment, Izuku laughed and said he could manage small tasks on his own. Hawks replied that he could handle some chores, and he gave Izuku a reassuring gesture to show he cared. Izuku teased him gently, and they settled into an easy, companionable rhythm. Izuku worried about the summer camp the next day, noting that his full ability could not last long and that he feared something might go wrong. Hawks reassured him that it was mostly training and that if anything happened, the necklace would alert Hawks or Izuku could call for help. The following morning the students of Class 1A and 1B gathered in the parking lot as their teachers explained the camp schedule. Aizawa told them they should use the time to push past their limits and reach new levels. Most of the class nodded, eager to begin. A student from another class remarked nervously about rumors that some of Class 1A were taking extra courses, wondering aloud if that meant they had failed and how embarrassing that would be. Monoma's voice cut through the noise, accusing Izuku of being full of shame. Izuku turned, and the cafeteria students swallowed nervously. Izuku, speaking as class representative, said that he was glad Monoma was not in the same position as him, since it would be embarrassing for everyone present. Itsuka Kendo stepped forward and delivered a firm strike that sent Monoma sprawling unconscious. Izuku thanked Kendo with a smile, and Kendo returned the smile. One of the students urged everyone to get going, and cheers spread through the crowd, including from Class 1B. Both classes boarded their buses and set off, excitement buzzing in the air. While Class 1B chatted quietly, Class 1A sang and played games to distract themselves from studying. Izuku told his classmates that they were always studying and that he wanted this trip to be a chance for them to be friends for a while. He thought about Hawks with gratitude. Hawks had helped Izuku realize he didn't want to live only as a hero but also as a person. An hour later, Class 1A's bus stopped for a restroom break, but Class 1B was nowhere to be seen. Two women in cat-like costumes and a small boy appeared near the stop. Izuku recognized them as the Wild PP Cats. The brown-haired member asked for Izuku's name, mispronouncing it. At first, and Izuku corrected her. The blonde member stepped forward and explained the rules of the exam, and everyone fell silent, waiting for details. The blonde explained that the students would be headed to the base of a mountain within the hero's domain. The other class had been taken separately by bus, but because their teacher had requested extra measures, Class 1A would be responsible for their own trip. Aizawa reminded the students that the purpose of the exercise was to exceed their limits and that he did not want to hear complaints. The blonde heroine added that they would have 3 hours to reach the base of the mountain and that anyone who did not arrive by 12:30 p.m. would not be served lunch. Izuku announced that the training camp had already begun, stretched, opened his wings, and took off. As the rest of the class prepared to follow, the blonde heroine put her hand to the ground and triggered a controlled landslide that sent Class 1A tumbling into a place called the Beast's Forest. The heroine explained that they would have to pass through the forest to reach the base of the mountain and warned them to take care. Izuku flew as fast as he could through the forest until he spotted a huge beast made of compacted earth. He fired an energy blast that shattered it. He noted wryly that the creature had size but little durability, then saw several classmates battling similar creatures and moved to help, sending blasts to break them apart. He encouraged everyone to hurry and show why their class drew so much attention, and with renewed speed and teamwork the students pushed through the forest. Despite the group's pace, Izuku arrived at the clearing well ahead of the others. He sat down and smiled, feeling peaceful and strong in the natural surroundings. Aizawa approached and commented that Izuku was first at everything, as usual. Izuku laughed and stood to show how much he enjoyed being in nature. When he pressed his hand to the ground, grass and flowers sprang up where he touched, which made Aizawa visibly surprised. Aizawa motioned for Izuku to sit again and then grew thoughtful. Aizawa, speaking with a steady concern, said he had been thinking about Izuku for a while. He acknowledged that Izuku had not received the love he deserved and expressed a desire to give him support and care. Aizawa explained that, although he could not adopt Izuku legally, He and Hisashi had discussed welcoming Izuku to live with them, and he offered them as a supportive home. Izuku sighed and thanked Aizawa, but explained that he was already staying with someone. He said that Hawks had offered to have him stay while training him, and that he was currently with Hawks. Aizawa was taken aback by the name and watched Izuku with a puzzled expression, sensing something unusual about the relationship. Aizawa left to speak with the wild PP cats, leaving Izuku alone. Izuku noticed the small boy with the heroes and smiled at him, feeling a natural soft spot. For children. When Izuku approached the boy and patted his cap, the boy glared fiercely. The boy tried to strike out at Izuku in anger, but Izuku calmly blocked the motion and, feeling the boy's hand tremble, asked if he was all right. The boy snatched his hand back, scoffed, and walked away still glaring, leaving Izuku momentarily confused. One of the heroines explained that the boy was Kota, her cousin's child, and that he now lived with them. Izuku realized that Kota's parents had been the hero duo called the Water Hose. The heroine confirmed that the Water Hose had been a bright, kind team who had died fighting the villain Muscular a few years earlier. Since that day, Kota had come to hate heroes. She explained that he blamed the job for killing his parents and despised it and everyone involved, calling them wannabes and fakes. Izuku let out a breath and nodded. It was yet another child hurt because of hero parents, different from his and Shudo's situations but still familiar. The woman apologized for the boy's behavior. Izuku smiled and reassured her that it was understandable and that one could not judge a child so deeply affected. The woman told him he was a good kid. He knew he was, and he also knew that if anyone was going to help that boy, it would be him. Class 1B had arrived alongside Aizawa and the Pussycats, but Izuku didn't speak with them. He had been occupied with his teacher, and he also felt purposely uncomfortable around some of them. Monoma taunted that making a kid storm away was not very heroic of the number one student. Kendo immediately moved to intervene before Izuku flapped his wings and flew upward. He told Monoma to stop acting insecure and that it was not a good look as he flew away. If the camp was going to take long to start, Izuku decided he could at least find where Kota was. It was easy. Kota's anger radiated from a cave in the mountain. Kota muttered that the heroes and their jobs were stupid, tears streaming down his face. Izuku hesitated, realizing he had been the one to upset him, so from a distance he touched the ground and made grass and flowers emerge around the boy. The boy stared in awe for a moment, then his expression hardened when he realized someone had interfered. He demanded to know who Izuku was and ordered him to stop using his quirk, prompting Izuku to sigh. Izuku flapped his wings and left no trace behind, while Kota rushed out of the cave and found no one. Izuku flew around for a few minutes until he found students marching toward the meeting spot. With a smirk, he swooped down and startled everyone. Shudo immediately created an ice slide, which Izuku used for a dramatic entrance and finished with a backflip. He bowed as some students clapped and whistled, and he chuckled at the reaction. He heard Monoma call him a show-off but ignored it, then walked over to his classmates and began chatting. Throughout the arrival PRD, students worked together to avoid losing. Monoma taunted that they needed help to arrive, and Izumo retorted by reminding Monoma that he had been brought in by bus. Kendo remarked that she now understood why Izuku was class rep, since not anyone could deal with Monoma, which earned laughs from some of the girls. Class 1A was told to wait until lunch, but Izuku had other plans. He suggested they all help cook, share stories, and pass the time together, which drew cheers and nods. Izumo admitted he did not know how to cook, and Izuku told him he could sit back, observe, and tell stories instead. They followed the Pussycats and Aizawa to start cooking. As Izuku followed, he dodged a hand that reached toward him. Kendo apologized for startling him. He shook his head, smiled, and asked what was up. Kendo glanced around, and Izuku noticed most of Class 1B staring at him. Kendo asked if they might join them. Izuku's eyes lit up and he enthusiastically agreed, saying the more people, the faster the food would be ready and the more stories they'd hear. Class 1B cheered and joined 1A and the pros in cooking. Ida rambled about how the exercise would teach them survival skills useful for missions, though only some students listened. Monoma muttered that Ida was an annoying nerd, and Ida's mood changed at the remark. Izuku asked what was wrong, and Ida assured them it was nothing beyond Monoma being slightly rude as usual. Izumo clenched his fists and stormed off, but Izuku told him to calm down and that violence wasn't the answer. Izumo protested, but Izuku cut him off with a mischievous smirk and clarified he did not mean physical violence. He asked if they had hot sauce. Izumo matched his smirk and nodded. Ida widened his eyes and protested that the prank was unnecessary, disrespectful, and might harm their reputations. Izumo countered that everything was necessary when it came to Ida, and Ida looked down. Izuku raised a questioning brow and made a mental note. They returned to cooking and finished before they realized it. Everyone was cheerful, trading jokes and stories about their studies. The highlight of the night was both classes laughing over Monoma's exaggerated reaction after biting into pure hot sauce. Afterward, Izuku excused himself, saying he wanted to set up his camp and get some sleep. Instead, he opened his phone and began texting. Angel texted that everything was going great, they were having fun and joking around, and training had not started yet. Bird replied that he wished he could be there to hang out too. Angel called him cringy and told him to stop being a pervert, and Bird protested that he was not old. Angel pointed out that he had not reacted to being called a pervert, and Bird playfully told her she could blame herself, using a teasing nickname. He had never acted this way toward anyone else. Answer after answer, the two kept talking until sleep finally took Izuku, and he fell asleep after wishing someone he cared about a good night. He slept well, but the morning was rough. Aizawa woke them before dawn to begin training. Aizawa explained that the camp was meant to push them past their limits and show how far they had come since the start of the year. He instructed that they were free to ask anyone for help except Izuku, because he had noticed the class's extreme reliance on him and insisted that dependence should be broken. The students wanted to argue, but Aizawa silenced them with a stern glare. Izuku nodded and began his own training, focusing on the abilities he could barely access. Using the golden flames Izumo had mentioned was a low priority. He wanted to learn how to teleport and to reach the state Hawks had called a purifying state, where he might help heal the Nomu. He started with teleportation. He knew there were rules, but they had always seemed vague. His teleportation had been unpredictable, so he sat and concentrated, attempting to appear in various places around the training field. It did not work at first. About an hour later, Class 1B arrived to begin their training. The Pussycats Mandalay, Pixie Bob, Ragdoll, and Tiger introduced themselves and demonstrated their quirks to both classes. Izuku and Izumo watched them with excitement. Tiger asked if any student had a basic augmentation quirk, and Izumo raised his hand. Tiger smirked and adopted a fighting stance, inviting Izumo to rush him. Izumo activated 8% full cowl and rushed forward, but Tiger casually dodged. When Tiger aimed a punch at Izumo's back, a shield stopped him. Izuku smiled and suggested they avoid causing physical harm to make a point. Tiger acknowledged Izuku's strength with a grin, and Izuku returned the expression. Izuku then asked if they could test each other, and Tiger nodded. Momo intervened to warn the pros that this Izuku had once defeated All Might. Some of the visiting heroes assumed it was a joke, but Aizawa confirmed Izuku's reputation and surprised the others. Tiger relaxed his fighting stance and smiled, clearly intrigued by the students with great power. Aizawa explained that the Pussycats had large area of effect quirks that could train dozens of students at once. He suggested their methods were the best way to advance everyone's abilities quickly, and both classes responded with energetic approval as they moved to begin training. Behind a tree, Kota watched the activity. Most students did not notice him, but Izuku sensed his presence and moved through the crowd to approach him. Izuku asked Kota if he would like to train together, but Kota only glared and ran off without answering. Izuku sighed and sat down to continue attempting teleportation. Aizawa approached and observed that Izuku seemed to be struggling. Izuku explained that he could not teleport reliably and described the things he had tried: imagining places, imagining himself in places, and imagining places appearing around him. Aizawa listened and then advised Izuku to clear his mind and consider how his quirk actually worked. He suggested asking what Izuku's quirk acted on rather than what it acted toward. Izuku, embarrassed, guessed light and energy. Aizawa agreed and walked away. The insight clicked for Izuku. He took a deep breath and sat quietly. Energy began to gather around him, and he suddenly found himself in the air. Panic hit as he felt himself falling, but he closed his eyes and reappeared somewhere else. He landed on top of Izumo, who had been on the ground. Izumo reacted with surprise and confusion, and then with a kick into Izuku to check his ears and legs. Izuku excitedly explained that he had managed to teleport. Izumo listened with wide eyes as Izuku recounted Aizawa's advice. Instead of imagining places, he should imagine the light in those places and attract himself toward it. Izumo nodded, clearly impressed. Later that day, Pixie Bob and Ragdoll supplied Class 1A with food materials but announced they would no longer assist them, insisting the students rely on themselves. Izumo protested that some of them would struggle with the basics, while Shoto bluntly said he could manage, earning a few laughs from classmates. Izuku offered to cook and explained he knew some recipes. Ida insisted they all needed to train in survival skills and self-sufficiency, and Izuku agreed, saying there was nothing wrong with following a guide. He proposed making curry, and the class agreed. With 1B training elsewhere, cooking was less chaotic but still lively. After a busy PRD of preparation, the food was plated and ready. Kota watched from a distance, muttering criticisms about fake heroes and the training they had witnessed. Izuku noticed him and smiled, but the boy scoffed and ran away again. Izuku sighed and sat down to eat with his friends when Mandalay called for Kota to come in for dinner. The others grew concerned about the boy's disappearance, but Izuku took a plate of food and followed the trace of his presence. Kota sat alone in the same cave, clearly hungry as his stomach rumbled. Izuku approached with a bowl of curry and surprised the boy. Kota asked how Izuku had found the place. Izuku explained that he had traced the boy's presence, offered the plate, and guessed Kota had not heard his cousin calling. Kota said he was fine and refused the food, accusing the aspiring hero of showing off and insisting he did not want to hang out with someone who spent his life trying to prove himself. Izuku insisted he did not show off, saying he wanted to be a hero because the world needed heroes and that the water hose had been inspiring people. Kota cried out for Izuku not to talk about them and stepped back, glaring. Izuku replied that Kota needed to realize they had been great people. Kota said that everyone around them acted crazy, calling each other villains and heroes and using their quirks to show off, and he blamed that attitude for his parents' absence, calling those people idiots. Izuku asked whether heroism and parenthood really work together. Kota stared, puzzled. Izuku shared that he had known a friend whose father, a hero, had been obsessed with raising a powerful child to beat a rival, and he revealed that his own hero parents had neglected and mistreated him when they discovered he was quirkless. Kota accused him of making it up. Izuku asked rhetorically if he could invent those scars, then removed his shirt to show the marks on his body. Kota looked horrified. Izuku told the boy that he understood how hurtful some heroic behavior could be. Kota asked why Izuku still wanted to become a hero if those people were so wrong. Izuku answered that because of their mistakes he was determined not to repeat them. Kota lowered his eyes in shame, unsure how to respond. Izuku pushed the plate closer and told Kota that his parents' sacrifice had been noble, that their presence in his life even for a short while was meaningful and worthy of respect, and that it was up to him how to use that gift. Izuku noticed tears forming in the boy's eyes and opened his arms, inviting Kota to come closer so he could comfort him. Kota let his emotions out and fell asleep on Izuku's shoulder. After carrying the sleeping child, Izuku teleported them under a lamp, muttering that he did not need much light. He found Mandalay and handed Kota over. Mandalay asked if the boy was okay. Izuku said Kota had passed out after eating and that he was really kind once someone cracked through his shell. Mandalay expressed surprise that Izuku had managed to calm him, and Izuku admitted with a nervous laugh that it had taken trauma bonding, leaving her confused. After a few minutes, Izuku returned to the forest to meditate. He felt nauseous from all the teleportation but held it in. As he levitated and sought calm, he opened his eyes to find an angelic figure seated before him. The figure bowed and addressed him as master, which left Izuku bewildered. He asked what the being was. The figure explained that it was an embodiment of his quirk, there to provide an explanation. The embodiment told Izuku that he had made acceptable progress with his quirk but not enough. It named the quirk Sun God and described its scope, control over nature, light, and energy. The embodiment noted that Izuku had learned many light and energy techniques but had yet to fully master the nature aspect. Izuku said he tried, but usually only while in forests. The embodiment chided him gently, pointing out that his sacred flames had been blocked and that his plant manipulation had grown in power but remained underused. It said he could improve a great deal, that he could reach levels of strength he had not imagined if pushed to his limits. Izuku was snapped back to reality, sighed, and stood to continue training, wondering how far he could push his abilities. He trained for hours and did not return to the students until the moon was high. Class 1A and 1B were cooking together when Izuku arrived, his clothes dirty and his body clearly tired. Izuku offered to help with a tired smile. Ida thanked him and pointed out that he looked exhausted. Izuku washed his hands and threw himself into the cooking, remarking that he might have pushed himself too far and joking that he was not the most fiery person around, which confused some of the others. When the meal was ready and everyone sat down, Izuku turned to Mandalay to ask about Kota, but she spoke first. Mandalay relayed that Kota had asked if Izuku would join him in his lair when he returned. Izuku brightened and took a plate to bring to Kota, but on his way he suddenly felt intense heat and pain as if his body were burning. He dropped the plate and doubled over, sensing a truly malevolent presence surrounding the camp. Izuku pulled out his phone and called Aizawa. Aizawa began to answer, but Izuku cut him off, shouting that villains were attacking and ordering the camp to be cleared. Aizawa reacted with surprise but began to respond to the alert as Izuku raced toward the mountain, bracing for confrontation. Aizawa shouted for everyone to rush to the buses. Before he could ask Izuku anything, a scoff reached him. Izuku had found Kota, who was being held by the neck by a huge, heavily muscled man whose body seemed to be layered with exaggerated muscle. Izuku reported that there was a powerful villain and that he would try to get Kota out as quickly as possible. Aizawa began to tell him to leave, but Izuku cut the call and put his phone away. Izuku targeted the man's hand with a blast while sending one of his feathered projectiles to catch Kota and carry him to safety. The villain turned and let his cape fall open. Both Izuku and Kota's eyes widened when they saw who it was. Kota mumbled that he saw his parents as the feather dragged him further. Izuku recognized the attacker as Muscular. A rippling layer of muscle formed over the villain's hand, and he lunged to strike. Izuku dodged in the blink of an eye and charged an energy-packed punch, but the muscle plating absorbed the blow. The villain glared and struck again. This time, Izuku could not avoid the hit and suffered a brutal impact that badly injured his arm. The villain taunted him, calling him a weak wannabe hero and wondering why anyone would choose him. Izuku froze for a moment, wondering who could want him targeted. He asked aloud who wanted him, and the villain sneered that it was the League. Izuku fired a barrage of blasts, but the muscle layer was too tough to penetrate. The villain's muscles expanded over his whole body as he charged with a speed Izuku had never seen. Izuku flapped his wings to produce a wind blast, but Muscular struck his wing, damaging it and sending him flying backwards as sharp pain coursed through him. The villain rushed in and struck Izuku again, forcing him to cry out. He felt as if his whole body had been crushed, many parts were badly injured and he was growing weak. The strain of his efforts showed. His quirk urged him to unleash intense heat, but the compulsion faded before he could fully act. It managed a single energy blast, but Muscular hit his other arm and Izuku cried out again. The villain called him pathetic and declared that he would harm him and the others. The forest filled with smoke and malevolent auras. Izuku tried to warn the villain not to touch Kota, but Muscular struck him again, leaving him barely conscious. When the villain threatened to break Kota's bones one after another and then harm the other children, something in Izuku snapped. His angelic form flared, his halo glowed and his wings grew larger. The villain shouted for him to stay down and insulted him, but Izuku ignored the taunts and blasted the villain, this time actually managing to hurt his muscles before levitating upward. Izuku summoned a massive sphere of energy, calling on intense solar power. The orb blazed and illuminated the forest. The blast struck Muscular, obliterating part of the surrounding area and leaving the villain unconscious and severely hurt. Izuku did not have time to deal with him further. He rushed on to confront the other villains. The exertion drained him. He could feel his strength slipping and knew he could only maintain his enhanced form for a short time more, but he pushed on. He reached Mandalay and found her injured by a large, aggressive lizard. He blasted the creature away, only for it to be transformed into a ball and grabbed by another villain. He tried to follow, but his body gave out and he collapsed, going limp. He had no memory of what happened next. He woke up in a hospital bed, startled and unsure where he was. Hawks teased him about visiting hospitals so often, and Izuku brightened when he recognized the older hero. He leaped into Hawks's arms, and Hawks smiled and patted his head. Izuku asked if everyone was safe. Hawks's expression fell and he replied that they were nearly safe. Izuku asked what he meant. Hawks explained that Katsuki Bakugo had been captured by the villains. Izuku froze in shock and panicked, asking how it had happened. Hawks said someone there had a quirk that could minimize objects and people into small orbs and that the man had tricked everyone and captured Bakugo. Izuku grew pale and weak at the news. When Izuku asked if they knew where Bakugo was, Hawks shook his head. Then Hawks added that they might have a lead. Izuku greeted Momo as she arrived and waved. Hawks responded with a dry hello. Momo smiled, placed a bag on the bedside stand, and asked how they were doing, hoping Izuku was feeling better. Izuku said he was sore and sleepy from the energy drain but would manage. Hawks only nodded. Momo then explained that before Bakugo was captured she had managed to place a small tracking piece on him that could be used with a device. She handed Izuku a compact tracking unit about the size of a phone. Hawks asked whether she had obtained permission from the pros to do that. Izuku and Momo froze for a moment. Momo assured them that she had acted with the proper authorization. She responded that it was irrational, and Izuku sighed. He added that Momo was very organized and always had well-thought-out plans, which made Hawks nod, though a slight scowl crossed his face. The girl thanked Izuku and laughed, and he smiled back while Hawks looked away, rolling his eyes. She said she had work to do and would keep them informed if anything happened, and Izuku nodded. She then excused herself and left, bidding them goodbye. Izuku heard Hawks mutter a quiet, reluctant comment as she walked away, and the two were left alone. Hawks told Izuku he would see if he could help, and Izuku looked at him with curiosity when Hawks gave a dry reply that they would discuss it at home. Izuku let out a sigh and looked down at his hands. He did not like Hawks acting so distant, but he knew he had done nothing wrong. Izuku turned to the bag Momo had brought and opened it. Inside was a small white teddy bear, a heart-shaped box, and a card. He smiled as he removed the chocolates from the box and read the card. The message wished him a speedy recovery, praised his strength and inspirational leadership, and expressed appreciation and friendship from his classmates, mentioning how they had been motivated by his example during the finals. Izuku folded the card, gently replaced everything in the bag, and set it on the stand. He stood and stretched, still feeling sore, when Hawks returned and announced they could leave. The two regarded one another for a moment before Izuku gathered the bag and followed Hawks out. They left the hospital in silence and flew toward Hawks's apartment. Once inside, Hawks greeted Izuku, and they shared a brief, affectionate moment before turning their attention back to the day's tasks. Izuku realized Hawks's earlier display had been partly performative, and he smiled inwardly at the thought of his protective companion. They did not linger, as Izuku needed to get to the school for a meeting of those involved in the rescue mission. Hawks reminded Izuku to keep him updated about the mission, and Izuku hurried off. At the school, Izuku found his brother, Shoto, Kirishima, Ida, and Momo waiting. Ida loudly expressed concern about the plan, calling it irrational and not as well thought out as it should be, arguing that going on such a mission without pro-heroes was reckless and dangerous. Izuku acknowledged the point. The mission was risky, but they were hero students, and that often meant accepting danger. Izuku teased why Ida had joined despite his objections, and Ida, blushing, explained that Izuku and Izumo had saved and inspired him, and staying with them was the least he could do. Izuku accepted that with a nod while his brother rolled his eyes. Izumo called for them to move out, and the group set off. They discussed transportation as they prepared to depart. Izumo reminded everyone that teleportation was not an option and that they had promised not to use their quirks or engage in combat unless absolutely necessary. Izuku relaxed his muscles and considered keeping his wings concealed for stealth, but the wings began to twitch involuntarily. He grimaced as they trembled and retracted, causing him clear pain. He admitted he had never been able to fully control them. Shoto warned him to hold back and only act at the last moment, and Kirishima urged him not to worsen his condition. Izuku agreed to restrain himself and managed to draw his wings in so they were barely noticeable. The rest of the train ride was quiet. When they arrived, the students rushed toward the signal and Izuku announced he could sense their target and an unusually strong, ominous presence. As they hurried on, they froze at the sight of Nizu and Aizawa, who were apologizing over the kidnapping of Bakugo. Their apology was displayed across the buildings around them, making everyone uncomfortable. Izuku hoped the next public announcement would be that he had been saved without a scratch as they continued. Izumo exclaimed that All Might and several other heroes were preparing a plan to get to Kaken, so they should be more than enough to stop the villains. Kirishima warned that All might be putting himself in danger if he fought, noting that after his weakened form had been seen he had not returned to his previous strength. Izuku asserted that All Might was the symbol of peace and would handle it. Momo asked whether they should just step inside. Suddenly, an energy bubble surrounded them. Izuku explained that it would not do much but would keep them together and provide some protection against a sudden attack. The bubble moved forward, carrying them with it. Izuku then announced that the heroes were not here, and the bubble stopped, startling everyone. He reported seeing at least 3 Nomu and rushed out of the building. Izuku added that he could now sense both All for One and All Might. The bubble dispersed and his wings unfurled. He apologized and told the others they needed their quirks for now because the heroes might be in danger. Platforms appeared under all of them. Izuku launched into the air, creating a shockwave that tore a portion of the building. His classmates followed on the platforms he had formed, levitating behind him. As they approached, they watched in horror as the building disintegrated into dust and rubble. Izuku cried out in pain as his wings expanded and he suddenly looked injured, energy coursing through him. The constructs under everyone's feet vanished, and they all began to fall. Shoto quickly created an ice slide that allowed them to descend to the ground safely. Izumo started to ask what was wrong but was cut off as he and the others felt the same oppressive presence pressing on them. Izuku identified the force as All for One and fell to the ground with a loud thud. His twin called his name. Izuku explained that every part of him felt like it was burning, as if it were begging him to stop the villain. A man hovered in the air nearby while a group of heroes fought a cluster of Nomu. The man taunted that no one would save them and unleashed a blast that sent the students crashing into nearby buildings, leaving them temporarily immobilized. Momo stammered a question about the attacker. The others were frozen with fear, but Izuku pushed through. He stated that All for One was pure evil and that he could steal quirks. Izumo urged him not to think about it. Izuku's wings appeared again as he generated a protective shield around the group, drawing a disdainful tilt from the villain. The man sneered that a child's defense would not stop him and destroyed the shield with another blast, which forced the students back and left them shaken and injured. In the chaos, Bakugo emerged next to the man through black, viscous matter, other villains following the same strange arrival. Izuku heard the villain's taunts but found himself unable to move toward Katsuki. He saw Izumo struggling through the pain to move forward. Izuku urged Izumo to use Full Cowl. Despite protests from the others, Izumo activated Full Cowl. Something slammed into All for One, creating a shockwave. A commanding voice demanded the return of a student. The students watched in stunned silence as the #1 hero punched the villain, the impact sending shockwaves that pushed the other villains back. Izuku called out for everyone to act. All Might rushed the villain and struck, and Izumo leapt to catch Bakugo. All for One halted All Might's attack and hurled him backward through several buildings, forcing Izumo to stumble as well. Izuku moved forward, forming an energy whip to grab his brother and pull them to safety before leaping back. All for One began to speak in contempt, but Izuku cut him off by forming a visibly thicker shield around the group. Kirishima asked whether they were simply going to stand there, fear evident on his face. Izuku explained that All for One was too powerful and that fighting him would be a death wish. If he acquired any of their quirks he would become exponentially stronger. Momo asked what Izuku planned to do. He sighed and admitted that he had used his full angel ability the previous day, making it nearly impossible to use again so soon, but that he was the one most likely to remain here without being grievously harmed. Everyone reacted with a mixture of disapproval and fear. Ida ordered that Izuku was not to stay, but Izuku replied privately that none of them had a say. Bakugo proclaimed that he could fight just as well, surrounding his hands with explosions. Izuku looked past the shield to see only All Might and All for One remaining. The other villains had escaped. He told Bakugo that this was not his fight and that it belonged to someone else. He opened the shield and departed, leaving the others unable to follow as he rushed toward the man. He allowed himself a quiet thought that maybe this fight was his as well. We're back now and have finished fixing and cleaning the house, but the stress of school is still an issue. In my final year of high school and doing my best, which is why I won't have much time for writing. I have started many stories that I didn't finish, but I hope to keep this one going.